What's up, y'all? Welcome back to this juicy episode of the Ones Ready podcast. This week, I sat down with Scott Zastrow. I'm not going to take away from Scott. We went for a long time. We had some technical difficulties at the end of it, but we're going to bring Scott on to kind of clean up some of the stuff that we were talking about at the end, and you'll see what I mean once you get there. Scott was one of the first 10 people that was inserted into Afghanistan in the early part of GWAT. I'm talking in September, early October of 2001. Scott was part of the team of 12 soldiers and one airman, CCT Will Markham, that we have actually had on the podcast before. So go check that episode out. Scott and his team did what no other team has ever done and probably will never do again in the history of warfare. Their actions inspired the movie 12 Strong. If you've seen that movie, this is the story that it came from. And Scott actually wrote a book on it called Dequello, which was his accounting of what happened in those early days. We're going to have Scott's book, The Dequello, listed on our website over at onesready.com. I'll make sure to link it here in the YouTube and on the podcast. I want to say thank you to Scott and to all the members of ODA 555 for him telling the story about exactly what happened in that first 6 months of the Afghanistan war and what became known as GWAT.
You're there's a scratch golfer and then there's you at number one.
My lowest ever was 0.0. I'm trying to get to plus this year.
So. I don't even know how I would do that. Like, how is it that you get that good at golf? Practice, I guess, but
yeah. So when I was on great story, my father died when I was really young, like I was 25 or 26. And so when I went home and like at the funeral and stuff, like to get all his shit or whatever, he was married. He had 5 different wives. So she was just like, hey, come get this shit out of my house. And he had a set of golf clubs there. So one of my best friends I knew was a big golfer and played. And I was like, hey man, I got my dad's sticks, man. Let's go play. He's like, don't do it, dude. Throw those things in the fucking trash. Don't even pick up the game, man. And that was right when Tiger started coming around, in 96 and the Golf Channel just started. So I fucking went all in, man. I got all the books and the magazine. I was watching Golf Channel all the time. I was going to the range at Fort Campbell all the time. And me and my buddies just started playing like all the time, and you'd be gone, 6 to 9 months a year. So you'd like play, for a couple months, have fun and then go away and then come back. So I've always been, into golf. It's just when I went to PA school, when I went to SWIC is when I really started playing a lot because I had a lot of downtime. I was home for 3 straight years. So I played a lot then. And then when I got back to Green, then I went to PA school, I got into it. So when it got time for me to retire, I was like, cool, I got more time for golf. So that's all. I mean, the biggest part about, getting out of the military and as you know, and when I started working for the VA, I would do all the exit physicals on dudes getting out, doing their exams, for the VA. And I would ask them all, like, what are you going to do now, man? And they're like, I don't know, take the job I had as a civilian or something like that. And I was like, you got to have a thing, man. Like it's my piece. You know what I mean? Like I don't play in tournaments. Like I don't play in the club championship or freaking any tournament. I could put my earphones on and go to the back range and just hit balls for hours and work on. And for guys like us, man, that are perfectionists, it's a game that can't be beat. So it's perfect, right? There's always something to work on. You got your short game, you got your putting, you got your drivers, you got your irons, you got around the green, you got bunker game. Like you could go out, Tiger could go out and shoot a 62 and be like, yeah, but I missed that putt on 17, man. And then you go work on putting for 3 hours. You know what I mean? So it definitely keeps me young and keeps me going. I do something physical. I'm outside every day. You can look at my ankle tans and see my wife makes fun of me all the time. It's like I have bright white feet and dark skin. So yeah, I just love it, man. It's absolutely for guys. I mean, it's no different. I mean, I used to be a big shooter, right? I was a competitive shooter, right? I shot IPSC for years. I got really good at shooting, but man, I mean, you got to get up at 5 a.m., drive somewhere that's the range, and you got to buy the ammo, and you got to set up targets, and you got to go, then you got to drive somewhere to the tournament and whatever. I live on a golf course now. I can just walk up my backyard. Same fundamentals, grip, stance, posture, alignment. You know what I mean? Same. Right. It's me. It's no different than running an IPSC stage. Just playing golf, just different weapon.
That is probably the most interesting thing about you. That's actually a lie. So Scott, we're just going to hop right into it. I'm not even going to do the intro, man. Okay. Like I'll worry about getting the intro done and we'll do whatever else. All but right. Scott Zastrow, thanks for coming on. Author, 18 Delta, then PA, then worked for VA, now works for POVAT, now retired golfer like we were just talking about here, and your handicap is down at a 1, close to a 0.0, which is something that I'm never going to get to. Like, I always liken it, I'm a BJJ guy, right? So the black belt is always, the thing that's right. For me in the future. You're actually like already a black belt at golf, so that's pretty tight. So good on you. the author of the book, the Dequello, the ODA that started a war. We're going to talk about all that stuff, man. But let's go all the way back to the beginning, right? So on the other side of this timeline, right? Sometime back in the day, Scott Zastrow decided he wanted to go into the Army and he wanted to go try this thing for Special Forces. Can you kind of tell the listeners about how that started?
Well, I joined the Army right out of high school. My dad was an Army guy. My brother was already in the Army at the time. He's a couple years older than me. He was already in the Army at the time. And I thought about it during school, but it wasn't really like, hey, this is what I'm going to do. It was actually kind of suggested to me. My parents went out to dinner one night for their anniversary, and they went out like a little cruise out on Lake Michigan. So I figured they'd be gone, all night. So I had a big party, and they came home early. And it it didn't end well. And when I woke up the next morning, there was a recruiter at my kitchen table at the breakfast table. So I kind of signed up right there. I was like, okay, at least they give me something to do. You know what I mean? It's a job. So I figured I'd use it as an opportunity. So I was like, I want to go overseas. I want to go to Europe. You know what I mean? It's free travel. So I got the contract to guarantee me Germany for the first 2 years. I only did a 2-year gig because I was just like, let me come in, get the college and get out. And I came in as a 91 Alpha, which is a 68 whiskey now, which is a combat medic. Mm-hmm. So I went to a medical platoon in Germany, and I got very lucky. And I can tell you that it's very weird how that first stint in the military can either make you or break you. You know what I mean? And like, I got lucky enough that a handful of dudes, probably 4 or 5 guys that I went to AIT with, went to medic training with, we all got stationed at the exact same place at the exact same time. So we kind of all came over together. And, when you show up at a new place in the Army, you're a single individual, and you go into a group that's already established and you kind of feel like an outsider. But we showed up with 5 dudes. So like, we already had a crew, what I mean? Because we already been together for 6 months, drinking, partying, doing the whole thing. So we showed up as a crew. So when we got there,
I wish you would have said, working out together, helping each other learn the craft. But I'll tell you that is what it is. When you have that crew, the dorm E3 to E4 mafia just together, just wrecking, just owning it. I love it.
Right. And it was awesome. Like that definitely set the stage. In fact, I still my best friend, Walter, we knew each other for 30 years. He passed away last year unexpectedly. And then another guy, Dominic, lives on Hawaii. We still talk 30 years later, man. And we're just, went different areas, different places, different paths in life. And but we still hung out all the time. That original tight 5 dudes was definitely here. And we got lucky enough to have an old 18 Delta PA as our PA for our medical platoon. So we had really good mentorship, really good dude, took us under his wing, taught us a lot of stuff, told a lot of stories. I went to EFMB in the Army. That's the Expert Field Medical Badge. It's kind of like EIB, but for medics.
Sure.
It's just a bunch of skill-based stuff with a written test, medical stuff or whatever. And they break you down, and they show up as like 300 dudes, and then they break you up by name and by roster number or whatever. And luckily enough for me, my buddy, that they paired me up with was an 18 Delta out of 10th group. So I spent, 2 weeks with this dude, just, BSing every night. And as you know, man, like you can try to fake who you are and try to play the role or whatever when you meet new people. But when you're hanging out at the fire, smoking cigarettes at 10 o'clock at night, like that's the real people. Right. And so I got to know this dude pretty good over 2 weeks, just telling stories or whatever. So, he just BS and like, tell me what it's like. He told me about selection. He told me about Q course, told me about his, what's it like on the teams and the travel. And, and this was back, in the early 90s. It was Desert Storm hadn't kicked off yet. So, there really wasn't nothing going on at the time. You know what I mean? And so it's just like a lot of training ops and a lot of, stuff like that. So that's how I got started. I did my 2 years. And obviously I was like, as a private, when all you're doing is, going out drinking every Friday night or whatever, you're living paycheck to paycheck. I think our paychecks back then were like, $300-400
bucks every 2 weeks. I was gonna say it's like, it had to be $200. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was like, it kind of established the, drink everything you got, and try to make it last 2 weeks. It probably only is going to last a week or 10 days. And then you're in the barracks for 4 or 5 days, waiting on that next paycheck. And then you start it up again. So it got me into that cycle. And, 2 years goes by quick over there. You know what I mean? And, Desert Storm kicked off during that time. And so I got to experience some different things. And then, my time came up and I was like, well, what am I going to do? I got no money, right? Like I got $18 in my checking account. You know what I mean? Waiting to get paid again. So I might as well re-enlist. They're going to give me $3,000 for a re-enlistment bonus, which was like $1 million to a E3 living in the Barracks.
100%. Right. Yeah.
So I got that. I went and I got my 2 years up. I went to Fort Benning after that and continued.
Like on purpose? Like, did you try to do that?
No,
like,
it's needs of the
nobody
Army,
ever goes to
like
Benning on purpose.
As an E4, you just do what you're told. Like there is no wish list in the regular Army. Like, hey, I want to go to the 82nd or I want to go to Ranger Battalion. It's literally like, okay, hey, you came on orders, you're going to Benning. Like, okay, and you just do what you're told.
I was going to say, that's why we call them orders, because nobody goes there of their own free will. You're ordered to go, so you have to. So you get to Benning.
Fort Benning.
Yep.
And that's where everybody asks me all the time, like, you must have been, really trained up or whatever to want to, be a hard charge or whatever. And I wasn't, man. Like, I was not your typical military dude, right? Like, I was the worker bee. I never really, because back then we had BDUs, and I don't know if you remember, but you get BDUs. Most of the guys that were considered good dudes are guys that took their shit to get cleaned and pressed and had the starched, uniform.
Yeah, to sew your pockets down.
I was never that guy. I was wash and wear, you know what I mean? Never really shine, brush shine the boot just to get the dirt off or whatever. But when it came down to working in the motor pool, like everybody like Zastrow, you got to go, because they knew I would just go put my head down and get it work. And I was getting kind of frustrated, because, Friday morning formation would come up and they would have the formation and they would do inspections, whatever. Like, and this dude looks good. He's got a fresh uniform. He's and then, this guy's, looks like crap. Hey, Jimmy, you get the day off today because you look so good. And I'm like, what the fuck? This dude never puts in any work in the motor pool and he's getting the day off because he fucking takes his uniform, pays $8 to get his uniform stuff. So I was really, I wasn't digging it. And I was thinking about getting out. And luckily I had a platoon sergeant who was like, hey man, like, I know you're thinking about getting out and this is when you're on, but there's a place in the military with a bunch of dudes just like you. You know what I mean? And I was like, really? Tell me more about it. And he's like, well, you should ask Sergeant, so-and-so, because he's going special forces. And I was like, oh, really? Like, that's cool, man. So I kind of, was just BSing with this dude, and this guy, it was pretty funny because he had like the SF license plate on his car and the little stickers, and he was wearing this. And I was like, hey man, they say that you're, and everybody, and he would always like duck out of PT and take off. And like, we go to the motor pool to like, cause we were in mechanized infantry. So we had all the track vehicles and stuff, and we'd have to go do maintenance every day on these things. And he would always like duck out cause he had to go train. And I was like, hey man, that's, because I had known from this dude in EFMB, this 18 Delta I met, and from my OPA, like what the path was, what the pipeline was. Like, you go to airborne school, you go to selection, you go to the Q course, whatever. So I'm like, hey man, like when are you going to the Q course? And he's like, oh, I haven't been yet. I'm going to selection in July. I'm like, you haven't even been to selection yet? And you got the fucking stickers on your card? Like, places like 30% attrition rate, right? Like
that is a technique, I suppose.
That's a bold move. So I was like, okay. And sure enough, man, no bullshit. This dude went to selection, comes back in like 5 days, right? Like, didn't even fucking make a week, right? So my platoon sergeant pulls me aside. And he's like, look, man, cause at this point I already been there like 6 months, and my personality is a little aggressive. So he's like, hey man, keep your mouth shut. At least he gave it a try. Don't give him any shit. And I was like, okay, no problem. So he comes back and, he's just kind of keeping his head down, not really saying anything. And we're in the motor pool one day and he just yells at this dude. And the guy looks at me and he's like, hey man, like, you're off the porch, man. Let him have it, dude. And I'm like, look, motherfucker, you didn't even you come out here. You never do shit. And he was like, and I was like, you couldn't even make 5 fucking days. And he's like, I'll take you to the SF recruiter right now. And I was like, let's fucking go, dude. Let's go. I'll fucking go right now. So he drives me across post, takes me to the SF recruiter, this big fat dude with a mustache like this goddamn big. It's hilarious. I remember this. And he's like, hey, this guy wants to go special forces. He's like, okay. And he's like, go down, sit down. He never got up from his desk. And he's like, start doing push-ups. So I'm like on the floor next to his desk and I start knocking out push-ups. He's like, that's pretty good. He's like, hook your feet under your desk, start doing sit-ups. So I just started knocking out sit-ups, right? And I was pretty fit. Back then I was pretty fit. And, so I started knocking. He takes me outside. He's like, see that stop sign? run down to that stop sign and back. So I take off the stop sign and back. It was like a half mile, right? It's a quarter mile there, quarter mile back. And he's like, yeah, man, like you're in great shape, man. Like we'll hook you up, when October you're going. And this was like August 15th. You know what I mean? So I was like 45 days away.
Nice.
And I'm like, okay,
yeah,
cool.
No, should work out fine. No big deal there.
Yeah. And in the meantime, we're going to NTC in August, which is, I don't know if you know anything about, Fort Irwin in the middle of August. It was like 138 degrees every day. So it's not like I'm going to throw on the ruck and go out and get some miles on my feet. You know what I mean? It was just, I'm like, you're out there. The only thing you cared about at NTC in the summer is when's that ice truck coming by? You know what I mean? So I can fill up my cooler. So I did like 0 train up, went to selection, and my whole goal was just to make it to day 6. Like if I make it to day 6, I got talking on this dude for the rest of my life, man. And it was just one of those things. I mean, I'm 6 feet tall. I was 119 pounds when I went to selection. So imagine this Adonis you see before you, 40 pounds lighter. You know what I mean? Like I was just a skinny kid going through selection. And I'll never forget my roommate and collector, my bunk bunny selection. We were on a ruck at 5 a.m. or something. And we're rucking, and all I hear is like, Zastrow, that's gotta be you, man. And I'm like, please. I'm like, yeah, it's me. And he's like, all I see is this ruck with these 2 little sticks sticking out from underneath it. And it's gotta be your ass. And so I just all they do, there's a lot of rucking and walking. They want to put miles on feet. You probably walk 250 miles in selection. And I probably quit every day. I just never told anybody about it. Like, you'd go, they would just drop you off, put like 10 dudes in the back of a truck, drop you off and give you a card and say, here's your next point. And you pull out your map and you're like, okay, it's 10 clicks down that way. And there's another dude sitting in a truck. You check in with him. He gives you a point and you go walk in another. And I remember at least once a day, I'm like, man, this is so dumb. What am I doing out here? Man, when I get to this truck, I'm quitting. I'm done.
That's it. Right.
I'm just stopped. And I would go up to the truck and I'd knock on the window and he'd be like, and I'd be like, hey, Sergeant, he'd be like, shut up, sit down. And I'd sit down and then he'd come out. And he'd roll down his window. About to tell him I quit. And he'd be like, go over there and start a fire. And I'm like, oh, I guess I'm done for the day. I'll quit tomorrow. And I would go and I'd go start a fire. And I just did that every day. And I ended up making 26 days. And that's how I ended up going SF. I was like, I guess I made it. And I got selected and I got back and they were like, oh, high five. Good job.
When you went back to that mechanized infantry unit though, when you saw that guy, it had to be a little bit rowdy.
I can tell you that beat the shit out of me, right? I had 119 pounds. That took a lot out of me. Like I came back obviously less weight than that because, you're only eating an MRE a day. And so I was pretty beat up, man. Like my knees were tore, my ankles were tore, my feet were just hamburger, what I mean? Cause I didn't know nothing about how to prep my boots. Guys are like cutting things out of their boots and you know what I mean? And wearing different socks. I was wearing white socks and boots and just fucking every day. Like my feet were just completely blistered.
You just raw dogged the selection course. Like you just showed up.
No train up. And there were dudes there that were like there were linebackers on the All Army football team. These dudes from like the 82nd and Ranger Battalion and the 101st that were like E6s, these big monster dudes. And I was just completely out of place. Like I just didn't quit, right? I did inside every day, but I just, because it was one of those things I think that I was lucky enough to do it when I was 24 years old. So I think it was like the, young PJs, man, like we're just too stupid to quit. Like you just did that's what you were told to do, right? Like you would just go do this, roger that, and you just shut up and moved out because you were afraid of getting in trouble if you didn't. So I just did it, right? Like, hey, you're going to do this, roger that. I do it. It's going to suck, but I'm going to do it.
It's a weird thing about our generation too, is we talk about that with Peaches and Trent, a lot. Is like we come from a generation where we're just idiots. Like they tell you like run faster, and you'd be like, oh, okay, and then you would just run faster.
I think it was because when we were kids, we didn't have a choice on anything.
No, we didn't.
Nobody asked us our opinion. Nobody asked, you know what I mean? Like nowadays, these kids are like, well, I think we should, like that never came out of my mouth as a kid because it was unheard. Like we were the generation that was supposed to be seen, not heard. Like shut your mouth, get outside, don't come back into the streetlights, come on. Like nobody cared what your opinion is on anything. So when I joined the military, it was those older guys who were like, my sergeant majors and first sergeant stuff were like Vietnam dudes. So you didn't,
Right.
you had, who cares what your opinion is, the E4 to this dude that's,
Right.
had a big red one patch on from, the jungle of Vietnam. So,
three tours in Vietnam and Cambodia. Like guess what? Your opinion does not matter. Shut up and go work on the vehicles.
I was definitely, I think that actually benefited us a lot about, hey, you know what I mean? Your opinion doesn't matter. You're a worthless individual. Like you're just, and I think that to this day, like one of my best attributes is my acceptance to my insignificance on the planet, right? Like,
amen.
That's
amen, brother.
That's one of the things that keeps me strong. You know what I mean?
Well, it's funny in a room full of, of our generation, like if somebody just raises their voice and starts yelling, like our first like inclination is to like, shut up. You completely stop talking. You look at this person and you're like, wait, is this person valid? Oh no. Yeah, I should be doing what they're doing. Like if you just, you have a friend group and they're like, hey, all you idiots, we're going to the other room or we're going to go drink in that room. Everybody's like, oh, okay. Yeah, great. Like we're the first people to just fall in line. It's like, it's bred into us.
Well, it's funny you say that because, when I, as a doc in a SF unit, you train about your 18 deltas, right? Like your job is to make sure that their skill set stays up. And so when we do training with them, I'm like, look, man, I've been doing this a long time. I've been in combat a long time, I've been in a lot of firefights or whatever. I can tell you from experience that when shit starts going bad, right? What do people respond to? They respond to the loudest, most recognizable voice in the short bullet comments. Go there, do this, get that, shoot there, get behind, you know what I mean? And I'm like, just scream something, point at a dude and scream at. That's like when, when somebody has a heart attack, they're like, you call 911. You know what I mean? Because that's what people respond to. Yep. Combat's the same way, man. Like even if you're not in charge, if you yell something and tell people to do it, they're just going to respond.
They're just going to do it.
So it's absolutely fair. So anyway, I go back to Fort Benning after selection, right? And of course it was, I was beat to shit. But I'm like, I got to play the role here. I'm like, it really wasn't that bad. I thought it was going to be this. It really wasn't that bad. And just to make this dude absolutely fucking cringe in his thing. So
I approve. High level trolling.
Yeah. So I got back in November and I had to go to airborne school the following April or whatever with a Q course in May. So I had 6 months there. And I can tell you that was probably the closest to celebrity status I've ever been. Is that 6 month period of being an E4 and making it through SFAS, you know what I mean?
Made it.
And the funny thing is when I got to back then, 18 Delta, so it was 300 F1. So you did a year at Fort Sam and then a year at Fort Bragg. So it was a 2-year course back then. Mm-hmm. It's condensed now into 36 weeks at Bragg. So I go to Fort Sam Houston, right? And I show up and I'm an E4. I'm 24 years old and everybody else there is like 30. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And
right.
E6 is, like and they're like, everybody thought I was National Guard because I was a skinny little kid. Right. And back then you had to be an E5 to go to selection. You had to, you know what I mean? So they were like, when are you going to make E5? Because they opened it up for a small period for guys that were E4 promotable. And what that means is you've already been through the NCO Academy or PLDC, they call it the Leadership Development Course. You've been to a board, so you're just waiting till your number came up, right? Till you made enough points or whatever. And they're like, hey, when are you going to make enough points to make E5? And I was like, I don't know. Don't you got to go to the board and PLDC and stuff first? And they're like, you're not promotable. And I was like, well,
what's promotable?
I didn't know what that meant, right?
Right.
I was like, are you flagged or are you barred from re-enlistment? I was like, no, of course I'm promotable. I just got to get the right stuff to get promoted, but I'm promotable.
No,
and they're like, you fucking moron. So they're like, that's not what that means. So they had to have a special board for me in Fort Sam because they were at that point. They're like, if we kick this guys out, we're going to look like the morons, right?
Yeah,
we have to
exactly.
explain why we took him in.
We let him go through the entire selection process.
Nobody ever checked, right?
Nobody checked your packet.
They literally had a board in Fort Sam with like the first sergeant and all the instructors, and it was like this mock bullshit thing where they were like, I had to wear my dress greens with like 2 ribbons on them, and they were like, what are the 5 colors of the map? What, you know what I mean? Like, what's it was like, okay, you're good. You know what I mean? And then they sent me to PLDC on the way from Fort Sam to Fort Bragg. I went to the NCO Academy for 30 days and then it was the rest was history.
So as you kind of learn those lessons, right? Like as a 24-year-old guy and you have to like take this stuff on, it's really hard to orient to something that you have no idea. And at that time, like you already hit it well. You know, this is early now, mid 90s. You had Desert Storm behind you, so you had those lessons, but you didn't really have a cadre of folks. You know, you had those people that were, you know, did tours in Vietnam. Those were your sergeant majors and stuff. But as you were going through the pipeline, what were you looking forward to? Because it's always astounding to me when I talk to guys kind of in your, it's kind of like in that mid range, you know what I mean? Like the mid 90s dudes that didn't know what they were really like looking forward to. So when you were in the pipeline, and as you were, especially, you know, as you're getting to the Q course, you know, for me, it was GWAT. Like I got in after 2000, you know, September 12th, 2001, you know, I was in the recruiter's office and I left a couple months later. And, you know, that was my whole goal. Like I knew, I was like, okay, I'm going to Afghanistan. I'm going to Iraq. We're going to go do these things. As you were going in the pipeline, what were you guys looking forward to?
Man, that's a hard question to answer. I can tell you, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. Like I had no inkling. Like I said, I pretty much went to selection on a dare. So I had absolutely no idea what I was going to. The only experience that I had to go from was my old PA was an old 18 Delta, and he had stories from like, you know, from the 80s, right? Like this guy was an 18 Delta. He was a Halo guy. He was on the Golden Knights for a while. So a lot of his stories involved just traveling with the Golden Knights and being on an SF team. So he never really talked a lot about his SF career. Mm-hmm. Probably because it was in the 80s and they didn't really do shit. You know what I mean? Yeah. And then I met that dude from 10th group and he just seemed like a cool dude. So I just was like, okay, it's going to be like just another unit in the Army and just hanging out. So I'm going to have a better class of dudes to party with. So I didn't really have any inkling of what to do. And luckily enough, they asked, it's funny because when you start graduating the Q course, they ask what's your wish list, right? So I was like, okay, I want to go to a 10th group. I want to go to first group. I want to go to, 7th groups, stay here at Bragg. And of course I get 5th group, like it absolutely not even closely on my wish list. So I was like, whatever, I'm going to 5th group. So I get there and in the Q course, there was some guys there that were, again, that was my first introduction to current SF dudes because these were guys on their SWIC tour, right? So these are guys that would come from the team. And again, these guys were giants, right? Because back then the Fort Sam part was what they now would probably consider SOCM, right? Like the Fort Sam part is when like the Ranger Battalion dudes were there, the SEAL pups were there. And that was like what they would probably consider SOCM now. So that was the 300 F1 part. And then the Fort Bragg part was the SFMS, which is the Special Forces Medical Sergeant course. And that was like just to go be it was only the 18 Deltas and the SEALs, right? Because the full Q course was like the SEALs advanced course for their stuff. So they would go to Fort Sam part as SEAL pups, and then would go back to the teams, and then they would come back and do the whole Q course as their advanced course. So the SEALs that were there were like E6s and E7s. And there were some pretty, well-known dudes at the time, like Holloway and Al Children, who are very well-known in the committee. In fact, when I went back to be an instructor in the Q course, Al Children was the head SEAL medical guy for their whole thing. So very, very well-known dudes. And these guys were giants, right? Like, Holloway was with freaking Marcinko, at the time. Like he was one of his guys. So I'm like, I'm hearing these stories and I'm a, 25-year-old, 24-year-old E4. Like I'm looking at giants, man. And I'm like, these guys are legends. And, and these guys are huge, right? Like these guys are, a couple dudes were, best Ranger Battalion competition. And so these guys are like 6'2", 6'3", 225 pounds, just going to the gym every day, crushing it. And I'm just like in the corner, like, what the fuck am I doing here? Like, I absolutely, it was, you could play that game all day if one of these things is not like the other. Like, I absolutely stuck out in every formation, every class, but I had already been a medic. So I was kind of, I wasn't totally behind the power curve. A lot of these dudes were like infantry dudes and whatever. So they didn't have any medical background. So those guys kind of would come to me and be like, hey man, what do they mean when they say blah, blah? And I was like, wow, like these dudes, like any other day of the week would be a mentor and a hero to me. And these guys are coming to me and asking my opinion on medical stuff just because I was at 91 Alpha. And as we all know, like combat medics literally don't know shit. They're white belts in medicine, right? Like they absolutely didn't know. So, okay, well, I better fake, pretending like I know what I'm doing here. So we had 117 people in our class, and we graduated with 38. So it was a, kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And this was back when, at trauma 3 was the big one. That was like your, culmination exercise of, get your aid bag, go down, moulage casually, you know what I mean? And there was, it was instructor roulette, man. Like you get a guy that, you walk down, as soon as you put your hands on, they're like, oh, you lost C-spine control, you're fired. And they would, as soon as they say go, within 3 minutes, dudes are walking back up the hill. And you're like, what the hell did you screw up in that? So it was such a just random, am I going to make it? There was go, no-goes on a weekly basis for 2 years that guys would just great dudes that ended up in the 82nd as medics or whatever. Right. Just the luck of the draw that you got a good instructor that, the moon's aligned for you that day. I can't explain how I made it or why I made it, or I'm not better than any of the other dudes that didn't make it. It's just, I got the moon's aligned that day. And I made it. Obviously I picked up some, a skill set and was able to, tap my head, rub my belly and stand on one foot in the right order at the right time and made it through. Cause back then, if you didn't get 2 IVs going in the first 10 minutes, you were a no-go.
That was
so
it.
You had to do your primary survey and you had to start 2 IVs in 10 minutes. And that was like the cutoff. If you could do that, you were good. And luckily enough, obviously being a medic, my, prior to that 18 Delta PA at least taught me how to train correctly, right? Like we had 25 dudes in our platoon. He'd be like, all right, Scott, stays your turn. He would line up the other 24 guys and I would just go down and start an IV on all 24 dudes. And then the next week it was Bill's turn and we would all sit down and put our arms out and he would start 24 IVs just to get to the habit of where you could do it without thinking about it. And so I went down there. At least I had the IV skill. That was their big thing back then. Obviously we don't do that. There's not as much emphasis on that.
It's
anymore.
crazy, right?
Then, that was like, you weren't a good medic unless you could start an IV.
2 large bore IVs.
Skill set. Yeah. I had that skill set down pretty good. So, I mean, so to see these dudes in the Q course, I felt so out of place the entire time because of the disparity between what I thought they were and where I thought I was in the hierarchy of the military at the time, that I always felt like I didn't belong. And then I end up making it and I get to group and same thing. Like I was 25 years old or 24 years old, just about to turn 25 when I showed up to the teams. And the next youngest guy was 31.
Right.
So, I mean, when you got a 7-year gap between you and the next dude, I mean, I was cherry for 5 years. Right. Like it was, shut up cherry for 5 years. I mean, it was just, I was always the young guy trying to learn thing. Right. And so I just kept the mentality of, I'm going to try to stay fit and I'm going to try to be a sponge and learn everything from everybody. So after a couple of years of being called cherry this, cherry that, I'm like, look, man, I'm still a cherry because you haven't taught me anything yet. Like you teach me something, I won't be shitty at it anymore. So I was always just the young go-getter party dude, like trying to beat everybody. Like if I can out PT this dude, I can outshoot this dude, whatever I'll have, cause at that young age, it's, obviously, combatives was a big thing. That's when the UFCs first started out. So we started getting into jiu-jitsu real quick, and that was another way. So it's just, if I just try to beat this guy, at this, so I'm going to I was that all in guy, right? Like I didn't care about like, what are we doing now? Oh, we're shooting now. We're doing pistols now. All right. I'm going to go buy a pistol and a race gun and I'm going to start shooting IPSC on the weekends and I'm going to try to beat him at that. That's just another thing that I can say I'm better than you at. Right. And over time, when you continuously start beating people at everything that you try to do with them, you start gaining a little confidence in yourself and your abilities. Right. And people can call it cockiness and arrogance or whatever. But when you continually beat people at things that you do in your life, you're going to gain a little bit of confidence in there. So that it's this over the years, at 4, 5, 6 years of doing that, you start gaining confidence in people and pretty soon you're not the young guy anymore.
Yeah. We call that being a subject matter enthusiast. You're going to be a subject matter expert at one point, but when you just I love hearing you say, I was just all into everything. Like stuff popped up and I was all in. I was just going to be the best at that one specific skill set.
You know who Gary Vaynerchuk is?
Yeah.
Like he's a big, it's funny that, people are kind of gravitating to him and he's such a big, speaker and that's kind of his shtick, right? Like screw everything else. Like whatever I'm doing at the time, I'm just going to go all in on that and be great at this one task. And I'm going to put everything I am into learning this one task and being great at it. And then, okay, well, when I'm bored of that, I'm going to move on to this one, but then I'm going to go all in on that one too, screw everything else, go all in on what you're good at. And that's what I'm doing with golf right now. It's just, I'm just, and that's why I mean, I tell people all the time, my medics would ask me all the time when I was a doc that, to me, there's no such thing as real 18 Delta, right? Like it's too much, right? Like you got to know veterinary medicine, dental medicine, trauma medicine, medicine, infectious disease, NDC. Like that's too much. Remember, each one of those is a specialty in medicine,
right?
Like there's a doctor for the foot. You know what I mean? Like you go to my buddy's wife, an orthopedic surgeon, you go to Kim and you're like, hey man, I got this heart issue. He's like, I don't know anything about the heart, dude. I do feet. Like what am I supposed to do with it? You know, then you bring me to your shoulder, I'm your guy. But you come to me with headaches and you should go see this dude. You know, that's why we have PAs. So I don't have to deal with that bullshit, right? So there's life in general it's too much as far as skill sets so whenever I hear somebody, or see somebody on social media that's, comes from our background and giving their opinion on politics or whatever, I'm like, dude, there's no way you can be good at everything. There's no way. And anybody who portrays himself as trying to be good at and great at everything is obviously full of shit, right? Like you can only be really good at a handful of really small particular tasks and skill sets. And that's only if you go all in on them, right? If I go half-assed in on golf and then because I want to be good at fighting again or whatever, like I got the, Century Bob in my garage and I use that as my workout skill, and try to still, you know what I mean? But I'm too brittle now to be rolling with you on the mat anymore. I got up to a purple belt and with JJ Mikado and he was big at he had a studio at Bragg, and so I was really into fighting for a while, and I was just like, man, I'm too small. I'm getting rolled up, and I started getting injured all the time, right? Like I got bad shoulder because of it, bad elbows because of it, because I would just too stupid to tap it all the time, and you know what I mean. And it was, but I tried. It was great for staying in shape, and it's a great skill set to have. But as well as I do, unless you're dedicating yourself to jiu-jitsu, you can't half-ass it in there, dude. No. You got to go all in, right? Like you'll get wore out, and you'll get choked out by a yellow belt or a blue belt easily if you're just not paying attention and you're not all in on it. So you try to pick something that you're good at and whatever. So back then that was the deal, right? Like let's go all in on this until we get good at it. And just over a long period of time, like I blinked and I was 30.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, because you're just, in the 90s, like you said, it really wasn't much going on. You know what I mean? So it was a lot of training ops, and Clinton was in power. So he really dwindled down the military, and people didn't like him, but we loved it because we were busy all the time. You're talking about max per diem trips on the reg, man, 60, 90-day trips, going to Saudi Arabia for the, Saudi Arabian National Guard, which is $100 a day for 100 days, right? Like, you're 28 years old and somebody's handing you 10 grand. Like that's, I'm like, I'm a millionaire. I'm rich. That was back when you saw, you could tell the SF dudes by their ex-wives and their sports cars, is because we were TDY all the time. So everybody had a Harley, everybody had a nice car, everybody was, their wives were awesome. They hung out, we had a small team, so we only had 10 guys in the team at the time. So all the wives hung out when we were gone. It was a very, just like I said, when I first joined the military, I had that small group of dudes. When I first joined SF, we had such a small team. We were very tight, hung out. I've seen it all in my 20 years on the teams. I've been on teams that were super tight. Everybody hung out on the weekends. Their wives all hung out together. Even when we were gone, the wives would go out to dinner and go to shows and concerts and whatever. And then I've been on teams where as soon as that whistle blew, everybody took off. Nobody talked to each other weekends. I got lucky enough that my first team was a tight group, and the team sergeant at the time and the team leader at the time when I first got to fifth group, remember it was 94. So it was just past Desert Storm and just past Somalia. Mm-hmm. And fifth group did both of those, right? There was no seventh group or third group or 10th group in Somalia or in Desert Storm at the time. So fifth group had the only combat experience when I first showed up. And my team sergeant and my team leader, there is a book out there called, I think it's called In the Eye of the Hurricane. Okay. And it was about that time. And the guys in that book were my team, like ODA 545, which is the scuba team downstairs. the Terry Peters, Don Alexander, DJ Joyer, like those guys were on 4-5 at the time. So they were written about. There's pictures of them in that book. And I'm like, and I get there and they're like, oh, these guys you're lucky you went to that team. Like those guys got a lot of experience. Hey, check out this book. There's your team leader. And I'm like, what the fuck? These are fucking legends. You know?
Well, that had,
I was lucky enough to get mentored by some pretty baller ass dudes, man. Like Terry Peters was one of the instructors in the Q course that was absolutely just the guy, man. Like when he walked in, he commanded attention. Like this dude everybody shut up. Even all the instructors were like, that's the guy. Right. And when I got to fifth group, he was the team sergeant at 545. When I got there, and DJ and Don were the team leader and team sergeant of my team. So it was funny because none of them would talk to me at the time because I didn't have a scuba bubble. Like it was, I was like, you know, cause Peters would come to our team room to talk to his boys. Right. And I'd be like, hey, Sergeant Peters, you were the instructor in the Q course. He just look at me and wouldn't say words, just look at me and just shake his head and look
just
away.
disgust.
I was like, okay, I know. Yeah. Just absolute. And I was like, oh, I guess I know where I rank with that dude. And then he would leave and I would talk to my team and I'd be like, Don, what? That guy won't even look. Like he's a hero, man. Like he's like, he's not going to talk to you if you're not a diver. And I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So I'd be like,
never made it.
Yeah. Like, how do I become a diver? You know what I mean? So I spent the next couple of years trying to learn how to be a diver. So again, one of those things, man, went all in. One of the guys I went to the Q course was at the time was the medic on the triple nickel. And I'm like, Steve, and he actually approached me and was like, hey man, we want to send you to DMT. Mm-hmm. Because, it's okay to be a dry DMT. If you're a dry DMT, then you can come cover our dives and I can dive with the boys, right? Mm-hmm. Like I hate being a medic on this team because I have to cover all the dives and I can never train with them. So if you go to DMT, you can come with us and go on the trips with us and go to recalls with us and you can just stay dry and party with us and cover the dives and I can go do all the mission stuff. So I was like, oh, sure. That's a great idea. Right. So they sent me to DMT. I went down to Key West for the first time, first exposure to all the divers, whatever, in the compound and everything. And I went to DMC and I made it. And I started hanging out with the nickel all the time and ODA 555 and started hanging out with them all the time. And while we were on these recalls, I'm like, hey man, like one dude at a time would just take me to the pool and teach me an event.
Sure.
Like, hey, I'm going to Kieran's good on the 50 meters. So he's going to teach you how to swim underwater. Bob's good on the wake belt swimming and finning, so he's going to teach you. And then they would go out on their dives, and the safety boat that I was in, the guy would just be like, "Hey, while they're diving into target, you're just going to get out and surface swim in." You know what I mean? And then, so I'm like, well, and I am absolutely, like, again, I'm tall and skinny. I have chicken legs. I absolutely am horrible on surface swims and finning. I freaking worst bicycle kick you ever saw. worst navigator. You know what I mean? I'd be like way off this way and then way off this way. And like, cause I'm too lazy to tilt my head up. So I would just turn and I would just, in scuba school, they called me Zastrow the water swap because I was always the last guy in on every swim team 13 or whatever, like the worst freaking dude. But again, too stupid to quit kind of thing. Just made it. So
when did you get out of dive school?
I went to scuba school in 99.
Okay.
So came back and at that point I changed teams, went to the nickel, did a couple recalls with them right away, a couple trips with them, did a JTF 6 in Galveston with the cops down there, which was one of my favorite trips of all time because, their SWAT compound was on the airfield.
Okay.
That shot over the water because it's a 1x5 island. So it's a very narrow island down in Texas. And so their SWAT could just shoot. They would just shoot out into the ocean. So their SWAT compound was on the backside of the airfield at the airport. The only way you could get to the SWAT compound, you had to cross the airfield. The only way you could cross the airfield is if you had a vehicle with lights on it. So as a medic vehicle, they gave me a squad car.
Nice.
Not a smart move. In fact, even the team sergeant was like, look, man, I understand you got to have medical support, but giving Scott a fucking squad car is probably not, I'm just telling you right now, I am absolutely not responsible for anything that happens to that vehicle or anything that happens inside that vehicle for the next 3 weeks. And
that's fantastic. I love how everybody knew it too. Everybody was just like, no, this is bad. Don't give him a squad car. Don't do that.
First day, I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but first day, we're driving back to the freaking hotel, and these two hot chicks in one of those Toyota Red Bull RAV4s, with the Red Bull can on top, pull up next, and we're in UDTs and Tevas and team t-shirts,
just putting the vibe out, baby. That's it. You can't help it. You can't keep the vibe in. The vibe gets out. That's what happens, man. They can feel it.
That's all you wear.
That's why you feel it. That's combat casual, baby.
And we're just they pull up next to us in this fucking car, and they're just like, "Woo, hey, babe!" And we're just like, I'm like, "Hey, is that car even legal?" And they're like, "What do you care, pig?" And they just drive away. And I'm just like, "What the fuck?" So I'm like trying to flip the switches. I'm like, "Which one of these things turns the lights on?" So we pull these chicks over, man, and they're like, "You're not even a cop. Who do you think we stole a car?" And anyway, long story short, we got counseled like later that day. Like, did you guys
pull somebody over?
Because they literally. We're on the side of the road, standing out there in UDTs and T-bus. It was very obvious we were not police, right?
Right, super obvious. So that gets us, it sort of lays all these bricks, right? Like, I kind of talked about it beforehand, but what are we looking forward to, and kind of what are you getting ready? You've been a subject matter enthusiast, and I was laughing when you were talking about the guys that would teach you just like one exercise at dive school, like getting you ready to go to dive school. Like it's like you're the Karate Kid. Like, why am I painting this fence? Like, I don't know why I'm painting it. Like, why am I learning to do a 50? Oh, it's because I'm going to do this in dive school, and your whole career up until this point has been that, like, going to SF, selection on a dare, going through the pipeline in the way that you did, just showing up and being like, well, you got to have a board for me because I'm here. And technically you're supposed to have this thing. But, now we're getting to, 2001 happens. So September 11, 2001, you'd already been established on the team. I assume at this point you were the senior 18 Delta on your team, were you not? Like, you probably weren't junior at this point.
I was already I was at E7 at the time, so I had already been to ANOC, which is the Advanced Non-Commissioned Officer School. It's back then it was 6 months at Fort Bragg, which is just absolute, like, sitting in a classroom PowerPoint death every day.
The worst.
What I didn't go into is during that time of 95 to 2000, that 5-year period of just going on trips, right? Like going, demining in Africa, med caps to Djibouti, went to the refugee camps in Kenya, which was horrible. Been to Somalia, was all over the country, just doing like JTF6, things with cops. Been to Saudi Arabia and Oman and Kuwait a couple times. We used to do Iris Gold rotations, which was 90 days in Kuwait, at the border of Iraq, where Ali Al-Salim was. That's where you guys, the PJs that we work with, were out of. During that time, it was again, the young guy in the team, that 5-year period. Again, there was such a big gap between me and the dudes. And even though I was like the young clown and the jackass and the freaking, I want to be seen. I had weak self-esteem. So I wanted people in the PX to see me with my green beret type thing. Cause I had, I was young and stupid and look how cool I am. I never really felt like I belonged. You know what I mean? Like, I was always, because I was the young dude, I was always an outsider, always felt the need that I had to prove myself, whether it was I could run faster than you, shoot better than you, everything's a competition. I could pick up a chick in a bar, on a TDY trip. I had absolutely no identity or self-worth to the point where I felt like I actually belonged. I mean, at any given time, I thought somebody would just walk in the team room and be like, "Hey man, come on." Like,
that's that imposter syndrome, man.
You absolutely don't belong here. You know it. We know it. Let's go. I would have been like, okay, no problem. Yeah. You got me. Like, thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate the time that I got to spend here. And I would have just packed my shit and left and went back to the 82nd or whatever. Like, I just kept waiting for that to happen, and it never did. And I blinked, and now I'm an E7 and I'm a senior guy.
Right.
You know what I mean? And it just, that whole fake it till you make it thing, like, I made it. Like, I faked it for 5 years in trying to do it. And all of a sudden I made it. Now people are coming to me, looking to me like I had experience or whatever. And then, like you said, 9/11 happened, and it was obviously, you know, everybody remembers where they were at that time. And,
Right.
you know, Fort Campbell at the time was already a closed post. Most posts were open where you could just drive in and out, but Fort Campbell actually had a gate with MPs at the gate, you know, air assault when you walk in, you know, if you had to have the right, you know, the blue sticker or the red sticker if you were enlisted back in the day. I don't remember.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So it didn't really change much at Fort Campbell. It just is a longer line getting in because now they're doing mirrors under the car before you go in. And it was the first couple days we were actually running a pre-scuba at the time. So we were, you know, we were just like, you know, what do we do? We're like, you know, obviously that day, you know, actually the start of the book kind of starts out there, and that of us running the pre-scuba, it was just, we were at the pool when it happened. And so we come in at 5 o'clock in the morning for PT. So as instructors, we're coming at 4:30. So there wasn't really much traffic coming through the gate. It was pretty easy. But at the time, you know, like every unit in the Army felt like they had to do something, right?
Sure.
Like we're at war, we got attacked.
We're at war, boys.
So like all these little units on post were like putting concertina wire around their parking lots. You know what I mean?
It's Kentucky, dude.
They felt like,
hey,
so
take it easy.
Yeah.
Take it easy, fellas.
So we're running PT that morning, and we're like, you know, every unit at Fort Campbell has, pull-up bars and ropes, you know, all the way down. So it happened. September 11th was a Tuesday. So Wednesday morning was our gauntlet day in PT, and the gauntlet day is we're just going to run down because Fort Campbell's like long and skinny. So they had like main roads with the units all the way down on both sides. So we're like, our gauntlet day is we would just run up this side of the road, hit every rope and pull up bar, turn around and come back down this side of the road and hit.
Makes sense.
So you're doing, you know, 25 sets of rope climbs. And now when I say rope climb, I mean, go up one rope, come down, go up second rope, come down, go up the third rope, come down. So one dude would do all 3 ropes. And of course, you know, by the time you get to the 10th set, you've done 30 rope climbs.
Right. You're just smoked, right?
You're waiting for the dude to bounce. You know what I mean? Like do the 20-foot fall. So it's a no bullshit PT day. But now you got a dickhead E3 standing there with an M4 with no magazine in it, you know, halt, you know, let me see your ID card. And you're like, bitch, first of all, this is a closed post. We wouldn't even be in here if we didn't have a fucking ID card. Second of all, who the fuck is carrying an ID card in fucking, you know, Ranger panties doing PT? And you got 25 guys running pre-scuba, and they're like, bro, if you don't get away from us, these dudes are going to wear you out.
We're going to beat you to death.
Gun from you, and we're going to drag you through your own concertina wires.
You're wearing a 1970s flak jacket. Like you're out here yelling at people. Come on,
and the full kit, dude. Like the helmet,
exactly.
the jacket, and the weapon. Like, who goes there? And we're like, dude, like it was so absurd because we like, look, you know, you feel like you have to do something, but stopping us from doing PT is not it, right? Because we all knew, like, hey, you know, like if anybody gets a call again. Proved it in Desert Storm, proved it in Somalia. It's going to be, this is Middle East. It's going to be 5th group. So we know. And at the time we were scheduled to go back to Iris Golden and in Kuwait in January. So we're like, at the time we're running pre-scuba. We're going to spend the next 90 days prepping for this trip. And we're like, hey, don't you think we should start thinking about, they're like, nope, you guys are still going to Iris Gold. So just focus on that. And we're kind of looking at each other, you know, me and Steve, the other medic, we're like, look, man, how about we start getting our shit together under the guise that we're going to, you know, Kuwait. And if something goes down, we'll at least be ready.
Sure.
So let's start, you know, going through our gear. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You're getting ready for the JSEP, but really what you're doing is you're starting to do a map study and you're like, where's Afghanistan?
Yeah. And it was, and then one day we, you know, in the middle of pre-scuba, they were like, we walked into the team room in the morning and there was, we didn't have a team leader at the time. We had a warrant. And the team leader from 5-1.
Bless your heart. How great was that? No shade on officers, but you had a warrant and had no team leader.
I'm not gonna lie. It was pretty fucking awesome. And, you know, he was a great dude, you know, super fit. He was just, I mean, we only had 9 guys on the team at the time. So we augmented with a team leader from 5-1, a Bravo, a weapons guy from 5-1. And then we had a weapons dude that was not a diver. He was training up to be a diver at the time. So we had 1 commo guy. We had 2 medics. We had a Fox and a team sergeant, which is an intel guy and a team sergeant. So so we walked in one day. They were sitting in the team room. They're like, hey, you know, this is Captain so-and-so and Sergeant Speakman from 5-1. They're augmenting our team. We're getting a call. So go home, kiss your wives, grab your shit and be in here Monday morning and ready to tell your wives they're not coming back.
Yeah.
Because you're going into isolation, right? So we had in SF, we had these things called isolation facilities. It's the ISOFAC. And now with the new buildings or whatever, they're kind of synonymous. They have an upstairs and a downstairs, where the upstairs is the team room and the downstairs is the cage where you have your own weapons room. But back then in fifth group, the old fifth group, before they tore it down and built the new facilities, is we had the barracks and the team rooms over here, but then across the street by the scuba locker and the Halo building was the ISOFAX. And it was just this huge building with, bunks and showers upstairs and a planning conference bay downstairs with your own weapons lockers. And it was just, what they do is they isolate your team. You get issued your mission. That way, you're synonymous, you're autonomous, you don't know, and nobody else knows what your mission is. You don't know what anybody else's mission is. And you're just, they gave us our mission packet, and we stayed there and planned for 10 days and got on a plane and left.
That's just the absolute most wild thing for people today that don't understand that is, and you'd have other teams planning in parallel on their other thing as well. So you'd literally be in deliberate planning. You'd be next door to a team. You had no idea what they were doing. They could be planning for your mission. You could have to go up and you could be briefing the same mission, and they might pick the better team, or they might be doing something completely different. And
I can tell you that there was, it was weird, man. It was weird. There was this air of, cause on the teams and, in this business, the only people that, it goes back to what I said before about the, having weak self-esteem and, you gotta be in the know, right? Mm-hmm. You're not cool unless you're in the know, right? The first guy to know is the guy in the know. And that's how you think you're cool in that thing. Obviously, as you mature, you kind of lose that a little bit, right? And you realize that everyone is full of shit, right? Everybody's
right.
taking it at and it's just, and we'll talk about that when we get into the medicine thing later. But it was, nobody knew what the fuck was going on. Right. Absolutely nobody. All you knew is that a bunch of dudes flew a plane into a fucking thing, right? We knew that obviously the Discovery Channel at the time was showing a bunch of shit on Afghanistan, right? That's the only reason, every night on the Discovery Channel, they showed the dudes from the 80s. Remember that, were there in the 80s and the agency was there in the 80s. So there was a lot of documentaries about that time. So we just started watching documentaries on the Discovery Channel about Afghanistan, right? So I started learning about the culture, learning about things. You start getting, you could get call for brag to the to SWIC or to SOCOM, the med planning conferences, and they would just give you a country packet. So we asked for a country packet Afghanistan, and they're just, we just started, let you have the Special Forces Mission Planning Guide. You can Google that and get the old school planning guide. This is how you this is the med section for it. What's the indigenous plants? What's the freaking disease processes?
Right.
So we just started going through that stuff and what would we face when we went there? Are we worried about zoonotic diseases?
Right.
They bring in this fucking wackadoodle dude from 10th group who taught at the mountain school. And this dude shows up with fucking snowshoes, the tennis racket, fucking snowshoes and all this camping gear. And we're like, what
was the dude's name from Rudolph? Yukon Jack or whatever the guy's name was? Cornelius.
Yeah. He showed up from that dude. And because the mountain team was next door and they were, and these guys oh, we got all this rock climbing gear and we're going to take, and I'm like, I just got done watching a special about Afghanistan, and these dudes are wearing pajamas and flip flops. I don't think we're going to need any of this shit.
Right?
Is it going to be, if anything, get me a North Face jacket? But other than that, these motherfuckers out climbing mountains,
right?
With all these snowshoes, they're wearing flip flops, man.
Right? Man jammies and flip flops, right?
So it was just the whole thing was absurd. Nobody knew what the fuck was going on. Nobody knew what they were doing. Everybody was faking it. Everybody was trying to sound like they knew what was going on. And then one day we walk in there and there's a fucking spook in there. And he's like, he came in with the mission. This is where you're going. This is what you're going to do. This is who you're hooking up with. This is the area you're going into. And this is what we need from you. Finally, somebody knew what and you knew where he's from. He came out from Langley. So you knew that he was in contact with the dudes that were on the ground already. So it was okay. Now we can stop faking it and we can actually start putting our efforts into doing what we're doing. So now we have a focus. Now we have a direction. Now we can tighten up from, one over the world, 50,000 map to from a jog map to a freaking, whatever.
to an actual grid square.
Like,
right.
One of the funniest things I'll remember from that time is you go through isolation for, a week or 10 days or whatever they do. And then you have to give a brief back to the commander because you're still vying for a job, right? Like
yeah.
You don't know it, but they might have 5 teams for the same mission, and whoever gives the best brief back on what you're doing is going to win the mission, right? You're all competing for a mission, right? So, it was funny because I'll never forget the Bravo stands up to get, because each dude, it goes into like a sequential order. The team leader gets up and gives the mission statement, and then the team sergeant says, this is what we're going to do. Then the Bravo gives the weaponship, the Echo gives the combo plan, the medic gives the medic plan, and then team leader comes back on and combs it all together. The Bravo's giving his mission statement, and he's standing over like a jog map of all of Afghanistan. He's like, sir, we're going to infiltrate this general area here. And that's like 80 square miles. When you do this on
it's all of the helmet. It's like, it's all of Bagram.
Yeah. It was so funny because for the rest of the trip, anytime somebody asked us, hey man, where you guys going today? We just look at the map and be like, we're going to this general area here. Like the entire fucking city of Kabul, like we're going to this general area.
Right. So you see Kabul.
The whole thing was absurd.
All of the surrounding area. There's this bowl, right? We're going to go essentially into this bowl in the center of the area. Yeah. So, man, getting into country and putting boots on the ground for the first time, like what was your initial, when you opened, your tent for that first time, where you stepped off the plane for the first time, man, the reality of that moment had to be wacky.
We took a C-17. So 3 teams jumped on a C-17 with all their gear. So we palletized, put all the pallets in the back, and then everybody was just on the C-17 or, I think it might have been a 41. I don't know. I think it was a 41. I don't know if they used 17s that much back then. It was probably a 141. Because I remember we sat on the sides. We didn't sit in the seats like a C-17.
I was probably
sat along the side.
Probably a 17, man. Yeah, the 141s are getting pretty old at that point. So
yeah. So we get on the plane and we obviously we refuel probably in Italy or something, and then fly over there. And it actually there's talk about in the book, but it was the first time I had ever experienced what they refer to as a combat descent. And
good for you.
I was absolutely unprepared.
Do we need to do this?
I'm wearing my earphones. No, I was wearing my earphones, and all of a sudden, they come over and they tell us, and I had no idea. And all of a sudden, obviously you get that little drop in your belly, like on a roller coaster.
You're
but
like,
it
wait a second.
Stop.
Right.
It didn't
You're
stop,
like, wait a second.
right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, and nobody's freaking out, and I'm just like, what the fuck is going on here?
Everybody's freaking
the dude
out.
next to me is like,
they're not doing it. Yeah, they're not doing it externally. Like it's so dramatic too. The first time, like the pilots, they'll shut the lights out. Like people are putting body armor on.
Complete blacked out. The dude next to me is like, because I was sleeping on top of one of the pallets, right?
Yeah,
like I was
standard.
up there, laid out.
Right.
And then the dude comes and touches me on the leg and was like, come down, I'm like, okay, I guess we're going in. So I come down, I put my seatbelt on, and, they start to spiral down, and, you're losing gravity at that point.
Oh yeah.
So the dude next to me is like throwing his water bottle up in the air, floating, you know what I mean? And I'm like, you think this is the time to be goofing off? Like, we're all going to die here, bro. And it's pretty funny. So we flew into K2, which is
right.
Uzbekistan.
Yeah.
That's where we staged out of. And when we got there, it was literally like just this compound out in the middle of nowhere with, 10 tents in it, surrounded by, dudes from the 10th Mountain who were prior security. And they're just, Sergeant Major, Battalion Sergeant Major meets us when we come off the plane. And he's like, hey, 9-5 come here, triple nickel come here, 2-3, or, come here. You're going, follow this guy to this tent, follow this guy to this tent, shut your mouth, let's go. And we're like, Roger that. And we just go to a tent, and we're like still in the planning stages, right? Like we're just doing it, waiting for the shit to go down, waiting for the stuff. And again, at that point, completely absurd, completely freaking, nobody still knows anything about anything, and they're all trying to act like they're in the know.
Yep.
The dudes in the other teams, the guys in the command suite at this point, because I had been there for 6-7 years now. And, I'm obviously well known. One of my first trips in group when I got there in 95, we went on a combat up to Bosnia Herzegovina. And that's where I first met, a CCT guy, a guy named, Alex Smith.
Mm-hmm.
And a really cool dude. In fact, Cal knew him really well. Young guy. And first time I saw somebody called Cass, first time it was a real combat op. So it was there just happened to, it was a 10th group mission, but they had a couple, UN had a couple of Pakistani battalions in it. So they brought 2 teams in from 5th group, and we were actually lucky enough to be one of those teams. So I was one of the few guys in that time that had already been on a combat op. So I had some experience. So guys looked at me a little bit differently, you know what I mean? And gave me a little more credit.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
Yep.
So when we were planning, I was like, well, you know, the only thing I had to experience was this is what I took with me to Bosnia, and this is what we did in Bosnia, and this is kind of how it went in the brief back, and this is kind of what we did, and this is kind of what, you know, there was a lot of, you know, it was all FID, right? It was all,
Sure.
which is foreign internal defense, which is all, you know, partnered forces, train them up, you know, go do tasks A, B, and C. These are the small tasks within those tasks to get them to. Let's try to get them all in the same shade of music and go in that way. So I knew it would kind of that we were partnering with people and we were going to do it on a combat op and try and go up against the enemy. So it wasn't really rocket surgery, right? It was like take this group of fucking dickheads and put guns in their hands and face them that way and do a movement to contact
and kill that group of dickheads.
Try not to die.
Right.
Yeah, and try not to die, right? Like
Pretty cut and dry.
Pretty much what we were doing.
Right.
So we kind of had like a game plan drawn in the dirt, kind of what we were doing. We still didn't know where we were going, and we still didn't know, you know, what was going to happen when we get there. But we did know that there was agency guys on the ground, that they were going to do the introduction, that they, and we knew that we were working with the Northern Alliance, and they had about, you know, 1,500 dudes who were going to be on the outside of Kabul. And, you know, our regardless of what your mission statement is, regardless of what you're doing at the time, we all know the unwritten rule in our line of business in this thing is to provide ground truth, right? Like there's really nothing you're going to do with 10 guys, right? Like 10 dudes is not a superior force by any means. They had 1,500. The Taliban had 15,000. You know what I mean? It's a fucking great story. You know what I mean? We get there, we hook up with our dudes. They take us to the front the first day. We meet this general dude and he's like, "Sir, the Americans are here." And he looked at us and he's just like, "Oh, so?" Like, I got 1,500 dudes, right?
Right.
Now I have 1,510. Whoop-de-doo. Like, we're really going to put a fucking dent in them guys now.
Right. Boy, it's over for you assholes.
They were like, look, you know, the unwritten rule was, look, man, the commander at the time was pretty well a guy named, you know, Mulholland, who ended up being, you know, making 4-star. He was a fucking super cool dude. But he looked like everybody called him Herman Munster. He was like 6'5", fucking monster of a dude, huge jawline, like a scary individual, right? But he was very calm. His demeanor the whole time was very calm and very cool. And he was like, "Look, man, I need you to get a good lay of the land. Like we don't expect shit from you, right? Like the end state of here is to take the capital city of Kabul, right? Mm-hmm. We don't expect you to do that. You're 10 fucking dudes. Right. We expect you to provide ground truth and give us a lay of the land. And, you know, so, you know, hopefully secure Bagram Airfield so we can use it as a staging area to bring in planes of equipment, supplies, and dudes from the 101st and the 82nd so we can move on the city and take it.
Right. So we can actually have.
So we expect you to be there for a year and provide ground truth. Like just give us good maps, right?
Sure.
Like that's what we want. Give it. So, I mean, think about it from their perspective, looking down over 50 teams, right? What do they want? They want to have the guy at the big sand table with the little Napoleon pieces where they can, you know, have their maneuver forces and say, okay, I got this square here moving this way and this triangle here moving this way. This is the, you know, remember the old Desert Storm jog map with 82nd and the
and Norman Schwarzkopf is moving around tanks and shit. Yeah. 100%.
That's what they wanted to build, right? Like they wanted that to be able to, but you can't make that job magnet unless you know what's going on the ground.
Right.
So that's what we really thought we were going to do is let's just use these guys, poke and prod, and create maps for people. That's what we assumed our mission was going to be.
And how did that play out for you?
That's not what happened. It started out pretty cool what happened. So we infiltrate at night. It was, the infill was pretty cool. That was out of that entire mission. I remember very vividly the infill platforms and the day of infill. We got canked the first night because of weather. So we got in the 47s and took off and then had to come back. So we had to do another ground trip. We kept getting calls from, the guys on the ground of what they wanted from us. You know, are we coming in full battle rattle, or what are we doing? What are we bringing? How much room do we have? You know, what do we do? And then at the last minute, they were like, look, they don't want anybody to be recognized as an American. Right. So at that, we had already been on a relaxed grooming standard. So guys are growing their hair out, guys are growing beards. So they send the S4 downtown Uzbekistan with our size sheet to buy civilian clothes.
Yeah,
and bring us back. And I'll send you a picture of the
S4 is logistics. So S4 is your logistics shop.
Right. Our supply guy. Just, you know, your standard freaking young E4 supply dude to do with credit card. He goes downtown.
Backpack full of cash.
Yeah. He goes downtown to the bazaar, and not like, cause they didn't have balls. So he goes downtown to the bazaar and comes back. And I swear to God, in fact, in the book, I talk about I just made a ridiculous reference to, remember the Saturday Night Live from the 70s, two wild and crazy guys, like the freaking 100%. The way they dressed, that's what they brought back. No bullshit. We had
know you're American
looking
now.
like we were looking like we were going out to the club with dressed button-up shirts with these huge collars. And luckily I had jeans with me because I was like, I mean, in the back of my head, I'm like, well, if we stop in Italy on the way there and on the way back, I can go out drinking if I bring some civilian clothes with me. So at least I had 2 pairs of jeans.
Smart.
So I brought jeans. I literally wore jeans and tennis shoes, and or jeans and boots. And I just put on their stupid shirt. Back then we had, remember the 7-layer suit with the puff or the fuzzy jacket. And
the 7-layer system. It was gray too, for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Like, why gray?
Well, we had black ones. We had black ones. So
yes, of course.
So I had black silkies. I wore my black silkies, the pullover and a beanie cap. But if you look at our initial photo, which right before we got on the bird, it was like dudes and like, one guy, the country dude on the team had his flannel, you know what I mean? Like everybody was wearing, it was very,
man,
but of course, still wearing kit. It looked like a no bullshit French Foreign Legion infill picture.
You guys were going to die. You know what I mean? Like you guys were like, listen, we're not coming back from this. I'm not worried about uniform standards on the way out. Fuck you. I'm wearing my flannel.
Right. So it's actually, you say that, it's actually pretty funny because, it's cool as much as I looked up to General Mulholland at the time, his go get 'em speech wasn't even remotely freaking. In fact, I mentioned in the book about freaking, man, that wasn't even remotely, influential. Like I'm not even motivated at all. He was like, look, 50% of me thinks you guys are the luckiest guys on the planet because you're going in first. And 50% of me doesn't want to send you because I know you're probably not coming back. And we were like,
Jesus Christ, guy. Man, that's not a pump up speech, General. Hey, sir, we got to work. We got to work on your pump up speech,
bro. Remind me not to have this dude speak to my kids' football team at halftime, man. That was terrible.
You have a bunch of kids quit. A bunch of kids just quit the football team. Like, I'm out. I don't want to go.
And I mean, and it was like, it was funny because my old team sergeant was, who was my senior medic. When I was on 5-1 before I went to the nickel, he was my senior medic, and he ended up making team sergeant. And he was a senior EA group at the time. He was in the planning cell. They're like, this dude's super experienced, came from Ranger Battalion. Like, we want him, to help run the ISOFAC or whatever down. Mm-hmm. So he was in charge of like the tents and everything and getting people stuff. He got in a lot of trouble because he brought us a bunch of freaking, undershirt bulletproof vests that they had ordered for like all the command, and he was like, fuck that, I'm dropping it off at the nickel.
Nice. Thanks, bro. That's a big win.
But yeah, he pulled me outside one day, and I talked about him, and he was like, look, man, are you ready for this shit? And I'm like, dude, I don't even know what this is. Like, no clue. Going. You know what I mean? I'm absolutely going. Like, I don't, it's fucking like, who would not want to take this trip? Right. Like,
right.
I tell people all the time, like that was our Super Bowl, man. Like, it's no different than the NFL. There's 31 other teams wishing they were in your spot, right? And
right.
You figure there's 40 teams in each group. You know what I mean? So there's 200 teams out there wishing that they were us,
chomping at the bit
first. So
right, yeah.
And so absolutely, dude. I don't care what we got to do. In fact, our team sergeant was very clear. Like, look, anybody who fucks this up, your career is over. if you screw this up for us, we're going in first. Like if you anybody here who screws this up, I'm going to make sure you're not an SF guy anymore. I will revoke your tabs. You will not fuck this up. You will fucking put everything you got into doing a good brief back, prepping your shit correctly, and doing everything by the book, 100%, everything you got to get us on this fucking trip. And so we got lucky. So we infill in 47s, 3 o'clock in the morning, right? It's about a 3.5 hour flight. And, we're supposed to do a link up. There's supposed to be an agency dude on the ground who's already embedded with the Northern Alliance to receive us. Right. And infill night was something that just, I mean, first time in, I can't even tell you that happened, right? Like the SF mission, right? De oppresso libera, to liberate the oppressed, right? Like this is Q course type shit, right? Like we're going to infill, link up with forces. And this is absolutely everything that you were LARPing in the Q course to prepare to go to SF. We were actually doing for real. And it hadn't been done in ever, right? Like when's the last time a team went and infilled someplace, linked up with a
guerrilla
force,
right?
And did this shit. Like this is historic, man.
Well, the funny thing is, if they gave you this mission in the Q course, you'd be like, this isn't going to happen. You're telling me we're going to go ride horses with a guerrilla force and take on the Taliban? This isn't even true. What Afghanistan? That's not even believable. The Russians couldn't get through Afghanistan. Neither could Alexander
in the
the Great.
Q course, they never talk about OGA being involved and helping you link up. Right. Like they never talk about, hey, we have an English speaker on the ground now. They never even talk about that in the course. You know why? Because nobody ever done it yet.
Right.
Right. Like it's not in any of the TTPs because nobody knows that they even existed. I never even heard the word agency when I was in the fucking Q course. Right.
We hadn't even written them yet.
Right. So, and these guys have been operating in Afghanistan since the 80s. Right. Like when the Russians were, that was where they made their bread and butter. And half of these dudes were there during that time. So they all went back, right? They already had connections. They already knew where they were going. They already knew the landscape. So we get there and there was a couple dudes, right? And it's pretty funny because you know how 47, 160th operates, right? Like we're supposed to land in a big open flat area with 2 47s, right? And then get out. They leave. We link up. First one goes down, creates such a huge, we did it in this little riverbed, such a huge rotor wash. The second one couldn't see anything, got blacked out.
Tight.
So he's like, I'm going to go over there and land. So he goes on the other side of this little mountain and lands on the other side, right? So we get down, we get off, bird lands, right? Total washout, right? Now, with no wind, the haze just kind of stays there.
It just sits there. Yeah.
It just sits, right? So we're like, you couldn't see 5 feet in front of you because of all this dust, right? Like you couldn't see 5 feet in front of you. And we're just like, it takes off and we're all like, okay, I guess we're here. Like, hey, where you at? You know what I mean? And we did a split team, right? So we when you're on an SF team, you have, you have 2 of everybody, 2 Bravos, right? So we're like, okay, we're in, team Alpha, team Bravo. One of everybody goes over here. One of everybody goes over here. One everybody goes over here with the team leader. The other half goes over here with the warrant. So you have 2 completely exact operates. You could do split team concepts, whatever. Mm-hmm. So one team was on one bird, one team was on the other bird. So we get down and we're like, okay, where's, you got contact with the other team, get that other team on the radio. So, hey, combo guy, get that other team on the radio. So we're like, we can't get them on the radio.
Of course not.
Because line of sight, right?
Like, of course not, right?
Because they're on the other side of a fucking hill.
If you can't get calm, get calm.
We're like, we have no idea. Did they go down? Did they turn back? Like, fuck, man. Now we're doing this alone. You know what I mean? Now we got 6 guys here. You know what I mean? What do we do? And of course, during this time, you start seeing the headlights in the distance of like a bunch of vehicles. And we're like, okay, what are we doing? Because in the brief back, the other team was doing the link up.
Sure. Right. Well, and I'll tell you,
we never went over this contingency of what do we do if the other dudes disappear in route. Like, I never even talked about it.
I love that you're like you get on the ground, and you're like, oh man, we probably should have planned for this because, oh man, I will say too, there is nothing.
Nobody even expected what that, it never even came across as a thought process of what happens if there's only 6 dudes when we start this mission.
Yeah. And there is nothing louder than the silence of when a helicopter takes off and you look around and you're like, okay, what now?
Right. For almost 20 years after that, and all the trips I went on, both to Iraq and Afghanistan multiple times, every time that particular instance happens, You know what I mean? It's the same, but it's absolutely, you can't explain it to anybody. That small window of right after you get dropped off and right before you get picked up.
Yep.
Right. Like that, just that you are absolutely at your most vulnerable. Right. Like everybody's in a circle together waiting for something to happen. And it's obviously, you know, the biggest signature to the enemy, right? Like you have a huge target to shoot at now, right? You have the 47. It's not a small bird, right? Like you know what I mean? So you want to talk about a pucker factor, man. Like you are, and now you're doing something that's never been done before, right? Like you're infiltrating another country in a wartime scenario, right? Like there's no, you know, it's, you know, as everybody likes to say in the news right now, it's unprecedented, right? Like we got no experience to draw from in this particular time, right? Except for, you know, the one time you did it in the Q course for pretend, you know what I mean? So it was absolutely unreal, man. It was pretty, it's something that you will never forget. Every time, and it doesn't even have to be the first time, right? Like the first time for you, right? Whether or not it was the first time that SF did it or at this war or whatever, because we were the first team or whatever, the first time you experienced something like that, it's something you will never forget, right? It's one of those life experiences in your mind, in your little, you know, photo book of all your memories where you take snapshots throughout your life. That's absolutely an 8x10 in that book, right? Like that's something that's going to stick with you forever. What we didn't talk about was Cal and how we hooked up with Cal.
And exactly. Right. And I wanted to get into that too. I want people to go read the book, pick up the Dequello. So, you know, we're talking about Scott's book.
Dequello.
I'm going to get this right. Dequello. No matter how many times I say it, I have a long history of saying things wrong.
We'll talk about that in a minute too.
Yeah, go pick up Scott's book. But I really want to, you know, talk about how it is that you linked up with Cal. So obviously, you know, we're a bunch of Air Force dudes, and you know, you were lucky enough to link up. We had Cal on the podcast before talking about POVAT and some of that other stuff that you guys are doing there. But how did you link up with Cal, your controller?
So we're in K2, right, in Uzbekistan at the staging area, and on the way over in the C-17 on the way over. They literally, JT's our commo guy, right? So we only had one commo guy. We had 2 Bravos, 1 Charlie, 2 Deltas, 1 Echo, a Fox, and a Warrant, and a Team Sergeant. So we only had one commo guy. And we're like, look, man, literally in isolation, they came and brought him the Embedder. Embedder had just come out. Right? Because before that, it was the 113 and these big, bulky fucking whatever, you know, and everybody's like, fuck, we got to carry shitloads of
everybody had, exactly. 7 batteries per dude.
Batteries and freaking, and all, like, it was just like, you dreaded the commo portion, right? Like the heaviest box on every pallet is the commo box, right? Like it was, and all of a sudden they give them a bunch of fucking walkie talkies and they're like, this can do it all. It can do SATCOM, it can do HF, it can do HF. And you're like, I'm not buying it. JT being the fucking nerd that he was, right? Like commo guys are fucking nerds, right? Like they're the guys that like to like every commo area of a fucking team room is a bunch of computers taking apart that this motherfucker promises that he could fix.
Exactly.
Like, putting together, like, so he read the entire manual on the helicopter, on the bird, on the 117 over with his headlamp, read the entire book of the Embedder. And he was like, these things are fucking baller. I'm going to have to teach you guys how to use these, but I will absolutely love these. So to get the fills, he had to go to the Air Force dudes that were doing, because Cal was at the time in K2 he was in charge of CSAR, right? So he was running the CSAR mission over there. So he's like, hey, how do I get a fill for this shit? And they're like, you got to go over to the Air Force guys, you know, the CCT dudes over there that run CSAR. They have all the fills for country. So you got to go over there and get a fill. So we couldn't leave our tents. So they put in a request to get them to come do it for us. So he comes over and he's like, hey, he comes in the tent. He's like, hey, I'm freaking, you know, Charlie Mike, I'm here to give you to fill out your Embedder. So where's your combo guy? So like, JT, hook up with this dude, go in the back, sit down in your little huddle, go over the radio. You know, he's like, hey, this is what I was reading in the book. Am I right on this? Am I right on that? So Cal gave him kind of a one-over class so he could then teach all of us. Turns out that Cal went to CDQC with our team sergeant. So he walks in the tent. It's like, hey, bro, what's up, man? Blah, 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 blah. You know, small community. We're always running into each other. You know, different schools or whatever, whether it's Halo School or Scuba School or freaking, you know, NCO Academy or Ranger School or whatever. You're always bumping into a dude that you met somewhere. So they had a little nub. He goes back and him and JT start talking. And I guess they're bullshitting back and forth. Like, God, man, like, you don't understand, bro. Everybody on this compound is envious of you motherfuckers right now. Like, you're going to do the deed, man.
Yeah.
And he was like, you know, if there's anything we can do, let me know. And he would be like, I would really use another combo guy. You know what I mean? Because if we do split team, we're kind of fucked, right? Like, who's gonna, none of these other idiots are gonna, no matter what I tell them about these radios, they're not gonna know what the fuck to do it.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, combo is one thing you need. So it would be really nice if we had another combo guy. And he's like, fuck, I'd love to go with you. And both of them,
he couldn't leave that CSAR team fast enough. He couldn't leave that CSAR. He went back and he went
on over there.
Later, nerds.
Yeah. So they literally walk up to the team sergeant and they were like, hey man, do you think it would be cool if we got him to come with? Who do we talk to get this guy to come with us? And they're like, can we do that? And, you know, and I'm just like, I'm, you know, you're in a tent. So there is no conversation.
There's no
that's
privacy,
not being
right?
Everybody.
It's right there.
So he was like, can we do that? And I was like, I don't want to be a dick here, but we had Alex Hunter with us as a CTT guy. And when I was on 5-1, we went to Bosnia Herzegovina, you know, in Sarajevo, we had a combo guy. And I could tell you it was badass because this motherfucker was calling Cass every day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And Cal was like, I'm the Cass master, bro. You need Cass? I'm your guy. And I'm like, they gave him to us. We didn't even ask for him. They gave him to us.
Right.
And they're like, let's put in a request form. So they sent out the fucking little, like, hey, we want to talk to our AST. And AST is what they call them, an area support team. It's your one guy link from your team to the command structure.
Right.
So it's like, hey, go get Aaron, have him come here. We got a message. We want to take a CCT guy with us. And he was like, I'll ask. So he goes up there, comes back like 10 minutes later. Give me a standard name line. Give him a standard name line. They send it over to the airport. They send it up to you know, Mulholland. He goes over there. Hey, it wasn't like, hey, can I take your guy? It's like, hey, we're taking Charlie Mike with us on this trip. And they were like, that's up to Charlie Mike. You know what I mean? That was their answer. It wasn't like, hey, you can't take our guy. They were like, well, let's see what he thinks about it. And Cal was like, they called him in.
Later,
like,
nerds.
Hey,
I'm going. Yeah.
You know, this is completely up to you. You know, this is completely up to you. The Army would like you to accompany them on this trip. And you just say the word, we'll tell them no if you don't want to do this. And he was like, well, fuck yeah. You know
I'm going. So, right. Have fun at K2, nerds. I'm out.
And I can tell you, as much as I despise you and your brethren, there is no triple nickel without Charlie Mike. Like he was absolutely instrumental in everything. And I mean, obviously 20 years later, him and I are still great friends. It established a lifeline. I mean, that mission does not, I won't say that it couldn't have happened and it wouldn't have went, but it would not have went how it went without CCT involved. And to be honest with you, that established the norm going forward. Like you never heard of SF dudes going forward without TAC-P or CCT help after that, because it was like, this is such a match made. And I mean, to be honest with you, you know, now that it's 20 years later, I'm out and I can't get in trouble for saying this. Like we did it to absolutely beat the system, right? Yeah. Like think about it. If an Army team wants to call in CAS, we have to fill out a NILINE, send it up to the fucking JSOTF, send it from the JSOTF over to fucking Air Force, down the chain to the birds, up the chain, over and back. And it was like a 24-hour process. Mm-hmm. Charlie Mike could call ABCCC and have fast movers here in 10 minutes.
Yep.
You tell me which you would want to go with. Do you want to play regulation and freaking and FMs and standards, or do you just want to get shit done? You know what I mean? And the SF team of freaking, you know, we'll worry about the rules later. Let's fucking, you know, let's make mission. That was absolutely the right thing to do at the time. You know what I mean? And that was the reason why we wanted to do it. Like if we wanted fucking Cass, like he could get it on board now. And I can tell you we all owe our lives to that dude, because there's been plenty of times, and we'll go over this of what transpired after infill, that, you know, we would not be alive if it wasn't for him calling in some ECAS to freaking so we could break contact. Like it was absolutely instrumental in what we did and how we did it to have Air Force CCT attached to us. And anybody who says that we could do it ourselves without him, we absolutely could. And we were calling cats as a split team without him several times, but we wouldn't know how to do it correctly had he not taught us the first dozen times. And, see one, do one, teach one. You know what I mean? Just out of the middle, in the middle of nowhere in October, he just hands me the radio and he's like, "You got this one, Scotty." Like, he called it up and set it up, and they're like, "We're inbound." And he just handed me the inbitter and was like, "This one's on you, bro." And step back. And I was like, "Well, what?" He's like, "Figure it out. You've seen me do it a dozen times now. Figure it out." And that's how I learned how to call cats. But I got taught by the fucking master. Like, this dude, he when he got on the radio with dudes, it was a no brainer. Birds came in, and the thing you pointed at wanted blown up, got blown up. It was that simple. He did it. He was so structured. He was so in command. He was so in charge, and he was the absolute right. It was like learning how to throw a football from Brett Favre. I mean, it was absolutely. It was like taking golf lessons from, Tiger Woods.
Right.
It was absolutely. He knew every little thing to do. From setting up the soft land to calling, to walking him on target, from general to intermediate to pinpoint, to getting it done correctly, to use the terrain around you, to orient the map, to get your face out of the map and tell them what you see in front of you. Like, everything, man. Like, absolute freaking scratch handicapper and calling cats. You know what I mean? It was awesome.
So as those days and those weeks and those missions, bled together, and, you kind of alluded to it to talk about kind of what happened, after infill. We talk about tactical momentum here on the podcast a lot. We talk about making sure that you're always moving forward. What were some of those, those impressions from the first days and weeks? Like, again, you go over it in the book, and we've seen, obviously you were the Chris Hemsworth character in the movie 12 Strong, just because of your rugged good looks and handsomeness, I assume. And we've seen the stories and we've heard it, but from you on the ground, like in those first days, those first weeks, those first missions of, 24-hour operations with the Northern Alliance, like, what was that like? Where was your headspace as these things were going on?
Okay, so we infilled, right? We actually linked up with the other team, right? Like the agency dude that brought the dudes in. It was, the infill was weird because we saw the headlights. I stopped where we saw the headlights. Right. We're like, okay, what do we do now? Like, we didn't rehearse the link up because they did, but we all know how to do a link up because we've all been through training and we all know whatever. Let's do the baseball.
It's a basic battle drill, baby. Friendly force link up.
Right. Like, hey man, I'm going to go in with my baseball cap. Me and him are going to you guys are going to pull security. I'm going to link up with Aaron. If I'm in trouble, I'm going to take my hat off. You know what I mean? And just kind of scratch my head. And if things go down, I'm going to throw the hat on the ground and get to the ground. And if that happens, just kill everybody. Right. Like, so standard link up. But this dude just comes walking up. Hey man, are you good SF dude? Like, it was just
how weird.
Like, okay, get your shit. He's like, hey, I got the trucks. Get your shit. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It was like, hey, get your shit, get in the trucks, and your other team's over there. We got dudes going to get them too. We're like, okay, cool. So they take us back to this mud hut dirt thing on top of this little cliff. And it was just like, hey man, like our generals, our guys in charge are down at Bagram Airfield. Right. They're operating out of the buildings right there on the airstrip by the tower, right? Like, that's the famous picture of the old tower at Bagram. So we're going to take you there tomorrow, and you're going to look up at the general, and we're going to do the introductions and whatever. Right. And we're like, okay, cool. Right. So get a good night's sleep, get some food in your mouth. Tomorrow morning, we're going to go to war. So next day we get a little convoy. We go down to the tower of Bagram, and it was just go up to the control tower, right? Like, that's what they were working out of. That's where, except it was like a control tower with no windows, right? So because it was all blown up and beat up. So we just go up in the control tower, and we were like looking over the thing, and we're like, okay, give us kind of lay of the land. They're like, hey, General Baba John or whatever his name was, like, hey, these are SF dudes. And he just kind of gave us drinking his tea, just kind of looked at us like, so, all right, I'll be over there in a minute. And he's like telling his guys what to do. So we just kind of, they bring us a bunch of tea or whatever. And we introduce him, and he's like, hey, what are you here for? What do you want? What do we need you for? Like, we got it under control. We've been fighting for 30 fucking years. What could you possibly bring to the fight with 10 guys? Like, we got this, right? And we're, obviously the team leader's talking to him, and he's like, hey, we're here to augment you, help you out, provide assistance, advise the best we can. Like, you know what I mean? Like, he was like, we have the ability with, Tex are marking him over here to call in airstrikes. Whenever he's like, you guys have been bombing this place for a month now, and your bombs just hit dirt. You're just doing random carpet bombing out in the middle of nowhere. You're not hitting any targets. You're putting zero dent in the fucking enemy because you're not hitting anything. Like, we can watch your bombs drop all day long. It's not doing anything to help us in this fight. So what, and he's like, oh, but we can do it pinpoint now. You know what I mean? Like show us on the map where the enemy is. And he's like, map, they're right there. And we're like, what do you mean right there? Like, literally the airstrip, the actual tarmac of the airstrip was the flot, was the delineation between us and them. So we're up in the towers looking over the airfield, looking over the runway to the buildings on the other side, and to those people that you saw, little dots, little ants moving around. That was the Taliban. And we're like,
perfect.
You gotta be fucking kidding me. We're literally 100 meters away from the bad guys. And we're like, well, why don't we shoot them? And he's like, what, are you crazy? They have 15,000. We have 1,500. The last thing we want is to start gunfights here at the airfield. We know this is our side, that's their side. And it was like very well known that we're not going to attack you. You don't attack us. This is where it stops. They have the city of Kabul. Bagram's about 50 miles north, right? Mm-hmm. And just north of that is all the mountains. So the Taliban could give a shit about what happens up in the mountains. They don't. It's strategically insignificant to them. They have the capital city. They don't need the outskirts. They don't need the suburbs. They don't need the mountains. Like, you can have, like, this is as far as you're going to go. You're not coming any closer to the city than this airfield. But from here south, we own it. From there north, you guys do whatever the fuck you want and be nomads and live up the mountains. We don't give a shit. Mm-hmm. As far as we're concerned, we have the populace in the city. You guys can have all that. So we're like, okay, cool. Let me ask you this though. If you wanted to blow up any one of those buildings, which one would you want to blow up? And he was like, obviously that silo looking one with all the antennas on top. That's their C2 nodes, right? Like, I would want to be that one. And so the team leader looks at Cal and was like, Cal, get us some birds. Cal gets over on the radio, starts talking. About 20 minutes later, he comes back and he's like, I got 2 inbound right now. And they were like, let's set up. What do we do? And he was like, JT, get the soft lamp out, set it up, point it at that building. Everybody else, shut your mouth, right? Like, that first day, he was no bullshit. In fact, guys are, over there smoking and joking or whatever. And he's like, look, if you're not involved in this right now, get the fuck out of the tower. Stop talking or get out of the tower. I don't want to hear shit. And everybody was just like, Daddy's mad, right?
Ooh,
like,
Dad's mad. Yeah, right.
Yeah, Dad's upset. We better shut our mouths and just kind of watch what happens, right? So sure enough, he points to frickin', we picked a target. Birds come in. One's inbound. Here's a direction. Walk them into they're obviously easy as fuck, right? Like, go north out of Bagram until you see the fucking northwest.
Look for the airfield, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Look for the airfield using the airline, the runway as a unit of measure. We're literally in the top, friendlies in the tower, bad guys up at the other side of it. And they were like, they literally paused. Are you saying that you're in the tower and they're in the buildings on the other side of the tower? We're like, yeah. And they're like, yeah. Okay, wait, one more time. You're in the tower and they're they're literally across the street, right? Like literally a runway's, 60 meters wide. You know what I mean? Like, you guys are 100 meters away from each other and you want us to drop bombs that close too. And we're like, yeah. So they literally have to fly right over our heads and for the soft lamb and hit something 100 meters away from us without killing us, right? But
perfect.
I mean, the deal is those lasers are so good. You can not only pick the building you want to destroy, you pick which window you want the JDAM to go through, what I mean? So, 10 minutes later, bombs blowing up, right? So now generals, my boys, you're in town. So now he's like, okay, yeah, it's way different. So, obviously we got a new place to stay that night. We got real food in our bellies. We got, we got ice, bottled water. It changed everything. So that was the introduction of us to combat and Cal to war and whatever. It was a direct hit on a couple, and then obviously call in, number 2 from once hit. I want you to go 50 meters west, just start going up that row of buildings and let's just start taking things out. Right. And so freaking, dealing death from day one, you know what I mean? Like, it just watching dudes explode, killing, dropping bodies, whatever. Obviously the most lazy way to fight a war, sitting up in a tower, drinking chai, right? Calling in Cass across the street. Well, is that technically killing people? I don't know. They're dead, but we didn't really do anything except call on radio. So we're like, okay, now we know what we're going to do. So we kind of laid out the structure of what we're going to do going forward, which is we're splitting into 2 teams, right? Alpha team, Bravo team. We're going to go out alternating days, 24 hours on, 24 hours off. Let's start getting a lay of the land, taking the the team leaders and the commanders of the Taliban forces that we're working with. Let's go around to the north, right? Like think about, looking at a map, like here's Kabul, we're up here. So let's start poking and prodding these areas around here, around the city, and see let's, draw a strategic line of where the battle lines are, where the pockets are, and where, to get a good view of, when we get resistance, when we don't get resistance, so we pretty much did movement to contacts every day. We would get in our trucks and we'd just kind of drive that way until we get shot at, and then stop, return fire, break contact. If we could call CAS in, we'd call CAS to help break contact. If we came in a big group of dudes, like with any kind of vehicular things like tanks or armored vehicles or whatever, we would try to call CAS on them. And we just did that for months, man. It was, the cartoon with the sheepdog and the wolf of clocking in the morning, fighting each other all day, clocking out. And it was a completely absurd way to fight a war. You know what I mean?
Right.
Literally movement to contact, engage, break contact, mark it on the map, do it again tomorrow. You know what I mean? Hopefully, break contact to the point where you don't get everybody dies, right? Because, that's your first introduction to, going through a pomegranate field or a grape field and fighting in a grape fields are very jungle like, right? Mm-hmm. Like a lot of brush and a lot of where you've hopped grape walls and stuff like that in Afghanistan. So a lot of, watching partner forces sticking guns over their heads and firing with their thumb on the wall behind them, like, what are you doing? Like just completely absurd TTPs of your partner forces. And look, man, these aren't range battalion dudes. We're not going to do movement to contact, set up ambushes and stuff like that. It's just not going to happen. They're not going to do it, right? Like you literally are going to get in trucks and drive because they're like, oh, no, we're not going to get. They were dreadful of us probing far enough and getting in gunfights because they were obviously scared shitless. And Talibans are no jokes because these are dudes that have been fighting for years. They're Pakistani, they're Uzbeki, they're Iranian, they're a different look to them than what we had, right? Like you could tell when you ran into, in fact, when we took the city and we started taking a bunch of prisoners, you could tell the difference between when you saw a Taliban dude versus, one of our guys, right? Like our guys were a bunch of, Scotty Zastrow little stickman dudes with beards. And these dudes were these big, bulky, freaking, big, thick bearded Taliban dudes that looked a lot different than most of the Afghan Taliban guys that we were looking at. These were original hardcore Taliban dudes.
Right.
So that's pretty much what we did. We just did movement to contacts every day. And, we had different OPs established at that point. After a couple of weeks of doing this, you're like, okay, we have a really good place to call CAS from and get a good, elevated position looking over the area in the north and in the west and in the east. So we had 3 OPs, operating out of Bagram over here, the OP west and OP east. And we would just kind of, tighten it up a little bit and grow in and move our guys out of the mountains north of Bagram to the areas around Bagram until we had a good, okay, we have our area established now. So we spent about, a good month and a half, establishing home base out of the Bagram area. You know what I mean? So yeah, owning it pretty well.
How long was that entire deployment? So you talked about being there for months. Like how long were you guys in country before they?
We were out of there by 1 January. So 90 days.
So 90 days.
Yeah, so this is something that, again, the mission set was to be there for a year. And the whole goal of that year was to do what we did in the first 30 days, which was to get a lay of the land, right? Mm-hmm. Provide ground truth, right? Like that's what they wanted, right? Like your mission is to go do movement to contacts and break contacts and call CAS and kill the enemy and deal as much death as you can to the guys that, cause you gotta remember, man, back then looking back on it, as we all know, did those little dudes in Afghanistan have any inkling of what happened on 9/11 or played any, or did some dude walking around in the fields between Bagram and Kabul have any even know? I mean, obviously word spreads and they probably know that America was attacked by some of their brethren in the fight for Allah, but it was absolutely, they had no part of doing that, but they're taking, like we were, that's why the name of the book is Dequello, right? Like the Dequello, the whole gist of that is a song. It's a song, it's a Mexican song, and it was played by Santa Anna on Generalissimo de Santa Anna to initiate the siege on the Alamo. And they played it 24 hours until it was all over, right? They played it continuous until the fight was over, right? It means no quarter, no mercy for the loser, right? And that was kind of our mission set there. Like, we just got attacked, man. Like, the country was pissed, right? The world was pissed. The country was pissed. The Joint Chiefs were pissed, and they're like, I want somebody's fucking ass. Bush was like, I want somebody's ass, and I want it now. And they looked over at the JCF, and I want somebody's ass, and I want it now. And he looked over at the Army and the Air Force, like, I want somebody's ass, and I want it out. And we just don't have them. They have a bunch of fucking badass Green Berets that we can speak the language. We can send them in right now, and they can deal death tomorrow. Like, the regular Army's like, we'll take 6 months, but we'll get all these tanks, and we'll get all these in the airborne dudes, and then of course the SOCOM commander's like, I can be in tomorrow.
Right.
And he's like, let's do it. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
Boys in. These guys go in behind enemy lines, even though they haven't done that since fucking Vietnam.
Right. Exactly.
We guys go behind enemy lines, and we're fucking. So that's what we did. So we were. In fact, there was a couple times the call and cast where some dumbass on the radio that was doing it that Cal was teaching was like, that was for Tower 7, motherfucker. And pilots coming back, yeah, we're in a fucking FDNY patch on my shirt right now. Like, there was just an air of vengeance, you know what I mean, of why we're there. And we could talk about it now. Obviously the following trips and going back a couple, 3 times, that kind of went away.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of like, like the second and third, fourth trip to Afghanistan, I was like, okay, we're working with these guys. We're going to help secure this town or this village and protect them and do that kind of stuff. So there wasn't really like a vengeance only, but that first trip, man, like, it was, we want to seek out and destroy as much enemy forces as we can. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I imagine it becomes more business-like after that. Like, you get that first trip out of the way, and then you're going back and working with the same folks, or going back to the same areas, and it becomes a little bit more muted, a little bit different.
It was definitely more FID-like. You know what I mean? When I say FID, it's foreign internal defense. Definitely more just hook up with partner forces. Like, let's teach them, let's run a sniper school. Let's teach them, ambush and move into contact and break contact and obviously we don't do IEDs, but we can do, explosives in with claymores and stuff like that, which is technically our IED. So we, a lot of, building up areas and, how to create different things in your terrain to get the enemy to go where you want them to go with obstacles and explosives and, making yourself seem bigger than you are with a force and that kind of thing. So that's what we did. The book does a pretty good job of kind of, if you think about it more like a movie of, okay, these guys go in, and then there's, particular times in movies where, think the A-Team, like after every, when they're doing something, all of a sudden music starts playing. And
the montage.
BA building something and putting together a thing. Like, there's times in the book where I try to make that kind of happen. Like, when we're in infill or when we're in isolation and we're training, like, these are all the different things we do to train. And then when we're on a particular mission and we're going to do a particular thing, we're going to build something and to do it. So you just got to think in your head, like, during this time, there should be like the A-Team music going while, the Camo guy's building this and the Charlie's building this, because that actually
you're teaching people how to put tourniquets on, like, you flash to the side. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. So that there's a couple points in the book where I kind of do that. So, we did that probably through mid-November, towards the end of November. I want to say it was right before Thanksgiving. We just woke up one morning and, standard, get up in the morning, make your morning coffee, eat a little, some of their crappy breakfast sausages or whatever the hell they do. They had, the foot bread that they make. We had, luckily for me, I went to Sam's Club and brought one of those big 5-pound Jif peanut butter things. So every day I would take 1 scoop of peanut butter per meal just to give me some protein in me.
Right.
You know what I mean? I'd spread it on the little bread and eat it with some of their canned jellies. And we look outside and there's like 1,000 people standing in the street. And we're like, what the fuck's going on out there? And their general just comes up to us and is like, we will take Kabul today. And we all kind of looked at each other and were like, yeah, just like that. Like, what makes you think we could do that?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I know we've been kicking ass for the last, couple months here, and we're doing some, everywhere you go, you win the fight. Again, you're going to build a little confidence and cockiness and arrogance of what you do. Like, you want to fuck with me? Like, I'll call my F-14 buddies and we'll come kick the shit out. You know what I mean? It was like, we are the bully now. You know what I mean? We're the big kid on the block. You know what I mean? Because anytime they tried to put up a fight, we not only would we, we think about it, dude. We had M24s, we had SR25s, and we had M4. So we're 203s on them. So we dominated every, and their guys are doing the same thing ours guys are doing. They're putting their weapons up and firing over walls, right? Like
sure.
They had zero, basic rifle marksmanship, and we're literally picking dudes off at random with an SR25 or M24. Like it wasn't even a fair fight, man. It was like the Packers playing a high school team. Like we were just dominating every fight that we got in. You know what I mean? And we were taking little to no casualties. Like every once in a while, one of their dudes would, they'd hit us with a mortar and got to take shrapnel, or we would get a stray round, just ricochet off something. Cause they would never, they weren't even close to hitting us anytime. They were like, there's a part in the book where they mortared the tower while we were in it. That it was pretty fucking scary one day. Literally, they were just up there, and all of a sudden, boom! You're like, oh, that was a close one, So, and then all of a sudden, they started hitting us, and they were walking it in, and it literally, because your tower, you have the tower, and then you have a small building on this side and a small building on this side, so it's like building, tower, building, and they hit the building right at the base of the tower, and this huge fireball comes in because we didn't have any windows in the tower,
right? Yeah.
So literally, it was like one of those movies where everybody dies to the floor and the flames come in, over the window, over your heads. And you're just like, whoa. And you could feel the heat, of the explosion.
Wow.
Everybody's, and it was like the best way. I'll never forget it. JT, do you remember in Beverly Hills Cop at the end, when they're in the compound and the two Beverly Hills cops are fighting and they're trying to lift the dude over the wall.
Yeah.
And they finally get the dude over the wall. And as soon as they go over the wall on the other side, machine gun fire goes over the wall and they just missed him. And literally that Taggart dude looks at him. He's like, what the fuck am I doing here? You know what I mean? We all kind of look at each other and we're just like, what the fuck are we doing here, man? This is stupid. We gotta fucking die. It was just absurd. Why are we fighting people? I don't want to play this game anymore. If we have a chance of that shit happening, that was too fucking close. And so it was, that was pretty scary, but we had been doing that for so long. All of a sudden we're confident, and our partner forces gained the confidence with us that they were now somewhat invincible. Right. So they took it upon themselves. Hey man, we're going to take the city today. And it was just what, and we're like, I don't think that's a good idea. And let me call higher and blah, 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 blah. And we're calling up, we're like, go up to call it back up to K2, hey man, these guys are moving out of the city. And dead silence. Can you repeat last? No, we're moving out of the city. And they're like, don't
do that. Yeah.
You've been there 60 days, dude. What do you think you're doing?
Yeah, the Army said they needed a year. They needed 6 months to stage and another 6 months to organize forces.
One, we can't support you in any way.
Right.
We can't send 10 dudes, and if you go there, you're going to die, right? We can't support you in any way. And two, we want to do it.
and oh, by the way, yeah.
This is we have to tell Big Army, remember, even though they're, JSOTA, the Joint Special Operations Command, they're not in charge of shit, right? Big Army is still in charge of everything, right? Big Army, Big Air Force, they're still the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff is not an SF dude,
right?
He's in charge of the SF dude.
Yeah.
So when he gets told, "Hey, man, our SF guys are taking your city," and he's like, "No, we already have strategic battle plans of how that's going to play out. We're going to send in the 82nd, and we're going to we're going to bring in mechanized infantry, and we're going to bring our tanks in, and we're going to surround it, and we're going to move in strategically and go blah, blah, blah." We can't have some random fucking, cowboy SF dudes running through the city shooting people.
Right.
Are you insane? You know what I mean? And we're like, look, I don't think you understand. They're going. What do you want us to do? Do you want us to continue and hang, the commander was very, he was like, "I'll take the heat, man. Put your hooks in, go with us. Let us know what's going on. Good luck to you." You know what I mean? So we're like, okay, they're leaving in 5 minutes. What do we do?
Tight.
Draw a freaking football play in the dirt. Team, Alpha team, you're going with the guys on the west. Bravo team, you're going guys on the east, right? And so the east was pretty much a road that went straight from Bagram to the northeast of the city, right? And it was there was a little bit of hills, mountains or whatever. So we had to go through this mountain pass, right? Obviously they're going to have their, ZU-23s or whatever at the top of the mountain, be able to shoot up or shoot down to protect the city. The west side was like a big plain, right? And you didn't want to go to the west because the west was like straight up old school, armored vehicles, their APCs, their vehicles, their tanks, their Toyota Hilux with the freaking, 30 cals on the back shooting at. Nobody wanted to go west because that's where the fight was, right? Like the east was pretty, and I can tell you without hedge, no bullshit, Calvin Markham did it alone, right? Like that dude, you want to talk about if there was to make, like, I get it, Chapman's a bad motherfucker, got a movie, whatever. This dude should have a movie made about him, right? Like he literally, I got a picture of this dude. Like he separated himself. He went with the guys in the west, but he separated himself from both. Took a freaking dudes with Jeeps, got in a Jeep by himself with a partner force, took a Jeep and just drove up straight up a mountain so he could have eyes on both sides. From that vantage point, got birds on, literally was calling in anything they could send us. We're taking the city. Give me everything you got. And literally flight after flight after flight of, flight of two out of freaking off this ship, flight of two out of France, flight of two out of freaking Uzbek, flight of two here, B-52 comes in. Like this dude, I got two on there. Be like, hey, you two, I want you on the west. Use US 1 as your line of march. Stay west of that road. Circle over there. He had Marine F-14s over here, Air Force F-16s over here circling these dudes. And he's just literally like no different than an air traffic. Like, I hear the hardest ATC job on the planet is to be the air traffic controller at Fort Rucker during a flight school, right? Because you got 50 students up and they're like, it's so chaotic. They only work those guys like 30 minutes at a time and they have to go outside because their brain is scrambled because they got so many moving parts and with horrible student pilots and all these different, you got little birds and helicopter and news helicopters and Apaches and 47s and Blackhawks, like everybody's circling at the same time, do it like most chaotic. What Cal did that day was probably synonymous to that, right? Like he had so many different birds moving and he just never missed a beat, man. And so I went with the guys on the east. I got pictures of us. Literally, we called it the Trail of Tears. Like 1,000 people on one road driving towards the city, and us in vehicles like up and down the dirt next to the road, like trying to keep these cats from going nuts. And while we were moving down the road, remember that when the Taliban took Kabul, they forced a lot of people out of their houses to the northern plains or whatever. So they had all these people went from living in a city to went in these dirt huts out in the middle of nowhere, right? Well, these people are like, where the fuck's everybody going? They're like, oh, they're taking, the Northern Alliance is taking Kabul. And they're like, well, I'm going to go get my house back.
I want my house back, right?
Or better yet,
a better house.
I'm going to go get Aaron's house.
Now we're talking about it. Yeah.
It's mine.
Yeah.
So that's what I would do.
I'm here for it.
So as we're moving down, right, with our 500 Northern Alliance, all of a sudden it started growing and growing and growing because civilians started to jump online with us. And we're like, oh man, like we gotta make sure we stay in front of these people because they're like fighting to get first because they're like, they want first dibs.
Sure.
What we find when we get in the city, right? But if we don't fight our way in, they're going to all get slaughtered as they go in there, right? So we're like, it was probably one of the most chaotic days of my entire life, right? But it was crazy. So we're like, and we're talking to Cal. He's talking to us. What are you guys seeing? What do you need? He's talking to them. What are you guys seeing? What do you guys need? And so literally like in an instant, just as we're hitting the city, man, the birds come in and freaking bird one takes out gun protection on the left side mountain of the road. Bird two, he talks him in on that one, takes like literally just as we're about to get in a fight, boom, boom. And we go through the middle like a football play. And it was, you couldn't have made a movie scene that was more perfectly timed than what we did to go in the city that day because of what he called in. It was, I mean, again, we'd all be dead, man. Like they literally had bird's eye view looking down on a road from mountaintops with machine gun freaking nests dug in that could have killed anybody on that road hundreds of meters up the road without us being able to return fire with any accuracy on them at all. You know what I mean? And literally we look up and both of them explode literally one after. One goes, 10 seconds later the other goes, and we go through the fucking mountain pass like it was nothing. It was the most, I mean, talk about just serendipity, destiny, whatever you want to call it, man. It was just a fucking bad motherfucker doing his job at the top of his, it was like watching, you know, Aaron Rodgers win a Super Bowl. It was like watching Peyton Manning, how he would run an offense. It was just a dude that was absolutely, it was like watching Tiger Woods tear apart Augusta. It was like a dude at the top of his profession doing his craft better than anybody else could do at the time. And it was, I mean, just to be witness to it was fucking, I was like, you know, it was Billy Madison when the dude's playing the freaking violin and he's like, he's good. It was like that, right? Like this dude's fucking good. You know what I mean? Like, I'm with that dude.
Yeah, I'm with it. Yeah. Like, yeah. I'm with it.
And
I'm with Dad.
Yeah. So we get into the city, and so now we immediately delineation from, you know, rural to urban, like change tactics, right? Like now we're no longer in a rural fight. We're in, you know, we've been fighting out in the sticks for 2 months. All of a sudden, boom, we're going street by street in a city, which absolutely nobody could. I don't care how good people think they are in this line of work. Taking a city is fucking stupid, right? Like if it was possible, right? And people ask me for 20 years after the fact of like, tell me about Afghanistan. How come we're not winning? And blah, blah, blah. I'm like, dude, it's not like we're going up against a bunch of dudes in uniform that says, you know, I am Taliban, right? Like when we're in the army or whatever, we wear a unit patch, right? Like it's not like these dudes are wearing unit patches that say Taliban. It's like literally, if it was that easy, there would be no crime in America, right? It's like saying, hey man, we want you to go into Chicago and kill all the Packer fans.
Right.
Like, okay, like how do you find them, right? Like how do you know, right? Like unless you come to me and be like, hey bro, homeboy, he's got an Aaron Rodgers jersey on the wall in his house, man. Like, did you know that? Like that's pretty much how we fought the war for 20 years, right? We were taking word of mouth from assets that we had established that, hey, this dude's, you know, on the hook with the bad guys. And we had to believe them. It's no different than what the cops are doing now. Like, hey, they try to get a CI or whatever, like, hey, who's dealing drugs and who's the bad guys or whatever. They're trying to get people to narc each other out. And that's the only way you can do it, right? Unless you're living in that town and you know everybody in that town. So that's so, but the original one is, you know, if you're carrying a gun and you're not one of us, you're one of them.
Right.
You know what I mean? So that's pretty much how we do it. So again, we hit the city, draw a little, you know, dirt, you know, sand table, like, hey, let's do a football play in the dirt. You ever play that game Risk when you were a kid? The dice and a bunch of little Roman numerals and you had to take over the world.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's two ways to play Risk, right? There's like strategically maneuver your forces and attack with like Napoleon. Or you could put all your assholes into one country, dominate the next country and leave one Roman numeral behind you and hopefully not dwindle all your forces. That's how we took Kabul. We're like, we're going to take a block. We're going to leave one asshole on a corner and then we're going to take another block. Right. And that's pretty much how we went through the city. Right. And we still have no idea what's going on with Alpha Team over at the West. Right. Because they had a big fight going on. And so we're taking the city. And I actually told this story the other day. At a function they had me speak at, we're going through the city and it started to slow down, right? Like we started to get a little more resistance. Mm-hmm. We started taking some casualties. We started questioning whether or not we had bit off more than we could chew. Is this really what we should be doing? Right? Like this is not fun anymore, right? Like out there in the fields where we had massive open area and fields of fire and we could dominate with our skill set. Here, you don't know what's around the corner. You don't know if they're in buildings shooting down at you, or you don't know if the next, you know, corner you go to, that's going to be the third Mongolian horde. You have no idea what's coming. And so things started slowing down. And as we started spreading out, you know, our forces started to get smaller and smaller as we went. And let's just say morale was starting to drop pretty fucking fiercely. Right. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the ground beneath our feet starts to shake. Right? Buildings are freaking doing this. Glass is falling out of buildings. We're like, what the fuck has just happened? What is going on? And then you start hearing it, right? And we look over at Frank and he's on the radio and he just starts smiling and he's like, proof through the night, boys. And we knew exactly what he meant right away, right? Like bombs bursting in air, you know, our flag is still there. Those boys are on the other side. Cal had dropped a B-52 strike on those dudes and just literally laid waste to everything in their path. And they moved in on the city on their side. Now we got two sides going, and we're just fucking, it was just, we got this sense of emotion and power and just a great, you ever see, Avengers Endgame at the end when Captain America's standing there by himself and he like tightens up his shield and fucking dudes are coming at him like the third Mongolian horde and he's standing there by himself, and all of a sudden you hear on your left and all the little yellow circles come out and this fucking spider dude comes out and the fucking magic dude comes out and the Wakanda people come out, and they're just like, yeah, I got to fucking live that in war, man. And it was just, in 24 hours, we had taken the entire city and we were standing on the steps with the other team on the steps of the American embassy. And it was the most insane 24 hours of my life. And it's something that no one can ever take away from me. And it's just an immortal fucking mission set. And it became the era of legends, like books got written about us and movies got made about us and freaking, guys did interviews and I was on, MSNBC Frontline and freaking PBS and freaking, they did a bunch of, we did a bunch of interviews and we got super famous for all of fucking 38 seconds. Right. In fact, one of my best buds was a dude on Task Force Ranger. So he's in Somalia and he was actually a guy played him in the movie Black Hawk Down. And I was like, and him and I talked about it all the time. And he was like, hey bro, like super proud of you. I read the article or I saw you on TV. And I was like, and then literally a year later, Iraq kicks off and we're completely forgotten about, you know what I mean? Cause I'm like, motherfucker, you got to milk that shit for 12 years, man, before fucking happened. You know what I mean? And here I get my fucking glory and it's gone in fucking 30 days because Bush decides to go in Iraq. So nobody knew, nobody gave a shit about the nickel after that.
Shock and awe happened and
had to go in Iraq.
Yeah.
So we got our excitement and then it fucking left us and nobody gave a shit about fucking Afghanistan. In the community though, like, I went to a couple of years later, I came down on a SWIC tour. I came down on orders to go to SWIC and they were smart, right? Like they leveraged me as much as they could and had me do a lot of talks with the freaking guys in the Q course about what we did and put together a slideshow and, show the pictures and kind of explain what we did, give little talks or whatever to kind of help motivate the younger dudes. Like, hey, what you're doing is no joke. Here's a dude that actually did it and freaking was the first guy there and freaking blah, 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 blah. So there was a little bit of, I wouldn't say fame, but there was definitely a little bit of know in the community of, who I was and got a little recognition sometimes or whatever. It didn't mean shit. I didn't get promoted. I didn't get awards. I didn't get any fucking,
there's no extra
pat
pay
on the back. And how do you do? No, I got zero pay.
Yeah,
in fact,
zero
I
extra
lost pay because when I went to SWIFT, they took me off dive status.
Right. So didn't even get your hazard pay?
If I wasn't diving anymore, I got penalized $275 a month for taking off dive pay.
Good for you. You earned that. Take that, nerd. Yeah. I love it. Yeah. Scott, we gotta have you on for a part two because I definitely want to talk about all the PA stuff. As we kind of like wrap up the feelings from Afghanistan and stuff. So we're gonna talk about that in a second one. I just want to put that out there before we get too far into it. So keep going, man.
Well, while I was that's a perfect segue because while I was in SWIC a couple of years later doing my SWIC tour, I was home every night and instead of going out drinking on Tuesday night, I just went to night school and took all my prereqs for PA school and got absolutely smacked in the PP and denied because of my age and my time in service. They were taking age waivers or time in service waivers at the time. So they were like, yeah, thanks, but no thanks. We don't want to be a part of it. So I did my couple years at SWIC. I made E8 and went back to the teams and was a team sergeant at 575 back in 7th group. And they just called me out of nowhere and said, hey man, like they're taking waivers again and you're a prime candidate. If you want to be PA, we'll grandfather you from last year's list. Just again, absolutely don't belong, but got accepted and freaking went on to be PA. So I was a team sergeant for a couple of years in 5th group, went to Iraq with them, went to freaking, and prepped for another Afghanistan trip and then went on to PA school and became an Army doc. So I did that for 8 more years, as an Army PA. I did a couple of years in the 101st with them because the Army is pretty pretty good about wanting you to learn what right looks like before you start beating the system. So they were like, we're going to send you to the regular army for a couple of years before we send you back to group. And how do you start?
Sure.
We're going to let you learn the system before you start trying to beat the system. So we know you're all going to be criminals anyway. So let's at least let you show you what right looks like first. And it was good for me. I mean, so I did a 14-month deployment with the 101st as a PA, which was both a great learning experience for me and for my medical career, and for it was painful as fuck because it was working, having been in SOF for 20 years and then see how the regular army does business and how just absolutely structured everything was. And, how in SOF, you're very end state oriented.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? This is what I want. This is what I want it to look like when I'm done. I don't really care how you get there, but this is what I want it to look like when you're done. You're like, roger that, and you move out, and you just figure it out as you go, right? And the regular army, it's like, no, these are the steps we have to go to get there. Why are you on step? You're doing step 5 shit, dude. We're still on step 2 here.
Mm-hmm.
And so they would just stop everything until step 2 was that box was checked before they move on to step 3, because that's what doctrine was. And you're just like, this is absolutely insane that this is how you guys are fighting a war, right? Like, where's the violence of action? Where's the freaking aggression? Where's the freaking taking the fight to the enemy? Where's, we're not at that step yet. In fact, that's, those are tenets of CQB and not freaking war.
Not doctrine. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, 7-8 dictates that we set up this and we make this cool PowerPoint slide with all the arrows of how our forces are going to maneuver, and that's how we fight the war. Like I was just in shock and awe but that's the reality of a machine, right? Like that's what machines do. Because if you just let a platoon of regular army dudes go do what 10 guys free for all, it would be chaos every time. So I totally got it, right? Because I would go on patrol with these dudes. I'd be like, hey, I'm going to go with you guys down to, Jelawar, and we're going to go do this. And I would go along with them, and I'd watch them get in firefights. And they, it was like, all of a sudden you go on patrol and guys would start shooting at you, and they'd be like, everybody would just drop, get behind walls and set up a defensive posture. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, assault through the objective, bro. Yeah. Like, what are we doing here? Let's, you guys put down suppressive fire. Let's move on these motherfuckers. And they're like, no, doc, no, man. That's what they want you to do, because they're going to set IEDs and we're going to maneuver and they're going to blow us up. And I'm like, that probably happened once in the last 5 years. And now all of a sudden it's a TTP of the enemy. Like, what they won't respond to? If we just kill everyone that shoots at us.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Their TTPs would change. Yeah.
They'll stop shooting at us. Right. But if they just take pot shots at you while you're walking with a platoon, and then you stop and huddle and they run away, they're going to do it again tomorrow. Right. But that's just the way they were set up. So it was weird.
Yeah, one of the first time I heard that, we were doing some operations up near Kunduz. This is later in the war in Afghanistan, but we were warm basing out of Mez, right? Like the little warm base over at Mazar-e Sharif. Mm-hmm. And it was funny because one of those agency dudes, we got there and we were in Bagram, and we were taking incoming every single day, like rockets, 3 or 4 times a day, and constant CRAM engagements. And one of them hit like the tent next to us and hurt a bunch of contractors. We had to do all this other stuff. And there was a bunch of stories about just getting, rockets lobbed from the surrounding areas of Bagram. So we get up to Mez, and we literally look at this guy and we're like, bro, the village is right over this wall. I was like, you're walking around, like he's walking around civilian clothes, like no gun, like just shorts and stuff. I'm like, bro, the village is right there. I was like, when was the last time you guys got like attacked up here? And he's like, oh, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. And I was like, are you joking? He's like, no. They did that a couple times. And then all of the tier 1 dudes just went to the village and killed everybody that did it and told them they were going to do it again if they got attacked. And that pretty much ended it. We were just like,
yeah,
that is a technique.
People, what big army and, I don't know how to say this without being politically correct, is once you bring JAG to a war, it changes everything.
You're right.
Right. Like, I mean, I have a buddy who's one of my best friends, is an Apache pilot. He was on the teams with me as a Charlie. And remember, we talked about I got a really good team. He got a really shitty team. Right. And he had a bad team sergeant, horrible dude, horrible personality,
Yep.
God complex, exploded the team, right? Like two guys put in for SWIC tours. One guy, John went to flight school. One guy put in for PA school. One guy put in for OCS, and two guys just got out of the Army altogether. So it just exploded the entire detachment.
Right. Yep.
So John went to flight school, and of course, being a fucking, SF dude, they gave him, they're like, you're going to be a gunship. We're going to make you a gun bunny. Like you obviously have the mentality for it. So they put him in Apaches, and like, dude, freaking, you put an SF dude in an Apache, like that thing he could unload his entire payload in 17 seconds if he wanted to. Like
sure.
it is a killing machine. The only thing that thing does is that dude has, a couple trips to Iraq, couple trips to Afghanistan. This dude's killed more people than smallpox. He's freaking just dealing death in there. But he was like, when I would land after, like he would go out and support SF dudes, and they would call in, and he'd be like, hey, this is, are you saying you have troops in contact with TGP and you can identify PID? Yeah, engaging. And like he would walk them through and talk on, you know what I mean?
Right.
But he would land, and he's like, as soon as I would land, they would come out and take the DVD out of my Apache. And then they would sit in the talk and with the lawyers. Did he have PID right there? Did he engage in that target? And he was like, guys didn't want to go up because they know that everything that they did, every word that they said that is being recorded is going up in front of a tribunal of some kind. So every commander knew that every mistake that they did, or any time that they had an engagement or came to conscience, that talks were listening and shit was getting recorded, and that they could lose their career. So it definitely affected the way that they did business. And I can tell you that one of the main reasons why that mission was so successful with the Nickel is because we had a bunch of jackasses with zero adult supervision. You know what I mean? I'm not saying that 100%. We went forward and committed any war crimes.
Of course.
Like that. But we were extremely violent. Mm-hmm. And we were like, no, man, like you shoot at us, we are going to end everything around you. Yep. Like we absolutely went in fully engaged that, hey man, when we get shot at, we're going to make you not want to do that to us anymore. Like every time that we came under engagement, the whole Death Blossom thing, we unleashed Death Blossom every time.
What a fantastic, fantastic reference on the Death Blossom. The audience out there probably skews a little bit younger. Go watch the movie The Last Starfighter. Yeah. That's a fantastic reference. Great work there.
Yeah, it was, but that was our mentality. But that was back, like I said, man, like that was back when we had a very strong air of vengeance going in. Whereas after that, the trips after that, it was very businesslike. Like you said, mm-hmm. It was like, this is what we're doing here while we're here. Let's try not to make any waves. Let's try not to let's try to bring everybody home. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like but during that time, in my first couple of years as a PA in the 101st, I got a lot of experience. I mean, as bad as they were at what they did, mm-hmm. I got a lot of experience, right? Like I was a doc out in the middle of nowhere. So every time casualties happened, they got brought to me. So I got a fuckload of experience. I got to go up and work at the FST with the flight with the forward surgical team, what they did, like a surgical team in a deployed environment, in a makeshift tent that was doing trauma surgery. And then I got to work, when I went back to 7th Group, a couple trips, succession trip after that. I got to work at every level. I was treat casualties at point of injury. I got to have guys evacuated back to me. I got to work in the FST, and I got to work in Kandahar at Brown there at freaking Roll 3 in Kandahar. So I got to work with the surgeons coming in. In that time, I got to do I did a trauma fellowship at Vanderbilt for a year, working with the top trauma surgeons in the Army at the time. They were doing their fellowships there. Guy named Kirby Gross and Tim Nunez, who ended up going back to Vanderbilt and being the trauma fellow at Vanderbilt. And he's an old JSOC surgeon. And I mean, he was like, "Oh, you're going to be an SFPA. You're an SFPA. Like, come with me." And he just took me under his wing and be like, sat in the trauma suites. And when guys would come in off the helicopters to Vanderbilt, he would put me up in the throne and be like, run, tell me, because you're not going to be the one working on the dudes. You're going to be running your deltas or running your medics. So I want you to run this crew. So he absolutely taught me everything about trauma. And that small window in time in medicine kind of changed my entire perspective on life. I don't know if that's kind of a big statement, but it took me from being a fake it till you make it guy to a data driven guy. Mm-hmm. Right. Cause we're all full of shit. And we talked about it before, right? Like everyone is full of shit. Right?
Everybody. Right.
But, and that's fine being an SF dude, right? Like you can fake it till you make it and you can say I'm cooler than I am, like, in the fight game. You know, like, oh yeah, I'm a fucking, I'm a blue belt in fucking Gracie Jiu-Jitsu or fucking, I train under JJ Mikado or whatever. Like, you can throw some words out there, like I know Katagatane and Hamagarishi, and you can throw all these words out there. And it makes you sound like you know what you're talking about. But when the fucking dude hits the mat, you can't lie anymore, right? Like you're not full of shit anymore. Medicine is very similar to that, right? Like everyone is full of shit, but nobody cares what your opinion is, right? Because there's only one rule in medicine, right? And that's, what does the data say? Right? Nobody wants my opinion in medicine. And when I work in the ER, when I'm working in a clinic and guys come to me, you're not coming to me to ask my opinion on what you should do for your sickness, right? Like you don't want my opinion. I guarantee you right now, you don't want my opinion, right? Because I'm a moron, right? Like somewhere there is some Chinese kid that did a meta-analysis of 10,000 patients and 19 case studies and figure out that this particular protocol and drug is the treatment of choice for that particular disease process. Right? You want to know if I know the data. Did you read that guy's data? Did you read that study that he did? Because I want you to regurgitate what that smart guys are doing. The smart guys are the one gathering the data and putting together these studies and doing all that stuff. You want to know if I know the data. So that changed. Like we were in an OR one time. And this guy got shot in the chest multiple times. So he's cracking this guy's chest open. He's doing, he's like, all right, Scotty, what do you do for blah, blah, blah in a chest wound? And I gave him some bullshit 18 Delta PowerPoint slide answer, right? And he just stopped. I'll never forget it, man. Like he was like head down doing his thing and he just went, get out. And I was like, what? He was like, get out. He's like, that's some bullshit PowerPoint answer. What you're going to do is you're going to go to the fucking library at Vanderbilt. You're going to go to the library. You're going to read 5 studies on thoracic chest trauma. You're going to read, not only going to read those studies, but the references at the bottom of that study that has like 20 references. You're going to go read all those references. And then each one of those studies that you read is going to have references. You're going to go read the references that the references referenced, right? And we call that going 3 deep. You're going to read the study, read the references, and then read the references that those references reference. And that's called going 3D. And for the rest of the year at Vanderbilt, everybody called me 3D. I didn't have a name. I wasn't Captain Zastrow or whatever. I was, hey, 3D, come here. Because once you go 3 deep on any particular subject, you now know what you're talking about because you have enough data underneath you and you've seen it come from everything that's been failed is why it failed. Everything that's been proven to work is why it's proven to work. And that just showed me that everything I had done up until my life to that point was totally full of shit. Every slide deck that I was given as an 18 Delta or in PA school was just so thin on that top layer of we do this because of this. None of it is ever evidence-based. None of it was put to the test. My wife's a psychologist. She calls it the 1-inch test. When people start running their mouth, if you scrape 1 inch off their knowledge base, they don't know anything more about that.
Right.
They're just talking shit to talk shit. I saw this on MSNBC or I saw this on Fox News or I read this on social media or whatever. That's the extent of their knowledge base and everything. The world is absurd, right? Like everybody's full of shit. And it's very hard to operate with that in the back of your head, right? Like I feel bad for smart people, right? Like the PhD people, because they're walking around knowing that everyone is fucking stupid, right? And running their mouth. And that's why I just stopped having an opinion on things, because when somebody be like, hey, what do you think about this? As soon as you ask them one thing more than the news snippet that they know, you know that they're totally fucking worthless in that particular section on life. And it just makes me look at everybody like a moron, and I don't want to do that. So I just don't talk about it, right? Like I'm like, hey, where are we playing tomorrow? What's your golf game? You know what I mean? So
right. Yeah.
It's definitely because, and it goes back to what we said before about there is no such thing as a real 18 Delta, right? Like to be a good dental guy, you got to be fucking dedicated to do that. To be a good veterinary guy, you got to be pretty dedicated to do that. To be a good trauma guy, you got to be pretty dedicated to do that. And I would get in a lot of trouble with the command when I got back to group as a doc because they had this unrealistic view of what an 18 Delta was or what a soft medic was or ranger medic was, that they could do all this, wazoo shit, man. And I would do training with my Deltas and I would shut the door and I'd be like, look, man, you don't have to bullshit me anymore. Like I was one of you. I know what you don't know. Right. You don't have to fake it with me. Right. Like let's focus on what I want you to know. I want you to be able to work with your hands. So when shit goes down, you can help a dude out. Right. And I want you to be able to make a phone call, like talk to me in my language. Right. Because when somebody's sick, you have access to me nowadays with cell phones and satellite.
Everybody's got Wi-Fi, baby.
Computers. You can call me and let me know what you have in front of you and I'll walk you through the treatment plan and we'll find the protocol that you're supposed to be following. Yep. Right. But when somebody needs your hands, it's probably emergent. So I need you to be good with these.
Right.
And then all I have to do is be able to, I don't need you to do what all these guys think that you can do. They're like, the command's like, oh, these guys can do appendectomies in the field. I'm like, motherfucker, they cannot cut somebody's belly open. And even if they could, I wouldn't let them. What the fuck? What are the 5 layers of the belly, dude? Give me the anatomical layers of the skin. And they're like, the skin, muscle, fat. No, no.
Right.
I don't want you cutting people open. Like, call for help.
The absurdity of that too. Like we try to tell people, like, being a PJ, like, medicine is a small, people are like, oh, do you guys go to critical care paramedic school? Do you guys go to like whatever, like, cause you guys are, medics, whatever. I can't even explain it to somebody. You have distilled it in such a way. Like, not only are we expected to do that, but like, just think about high angle rescue. Like, somebody is, no kidding, hanging off of a cliff. Like, do you know the complexity of you can't just tie a rope to something.
There are people that do just that for a living. Right?
And they die.
People think because
and it kills the best people. And like, I'm a scuba diver, and
they expect you to do it once when it's necessary.
Right. Yeah. And I haven't done it in months.
Having not done it since going to school.
Exactly. Well,
right?
And I talk about being a jump master too. I don't know how many times I've left a military airplane and been like, wait,
that's a full-time job.
Who checked me? Am I going to be good? Oh my God. I hope one of the guys doesn't die. And oh, by the way, I still have to do medicine as well. They're like, well, we just need you to be a good medic and a good shooter and good at tactics and jump master.
Who's the best jump master you'll ever know? The guy teaching at jump master.
Exactly.
Because he does it every day, all day.
Right?
That's it. The best medicine you will ever do as a PJ is just when you got out of critical care school.
That's it.
The best trauma I have ever been was right after I did a year in Vanderbilt.
Right.
Like, and then when I got downrange and I started, and when I was in the OR every day at Kandahar, working with a trauma surgeon as second cut and receiving guys in, right? Like, that was the best I went. The second time I was best in medicine is when they made me the director of the medical director for the School of Combat Medicine at Fort Campbell, because I was teaching it every day. So I was reading every day and I was in front of students and we were going through scenarios and I was putting them on the field and watching, because when you teach something, you pretty much see every fuck up that's going to happen from a retard, right? Like, when you put 50 retards through a school a month, you're going to see stuff that you've never seen before. And now in your head, you know what not to do, right?
Sure.
Like, I've seen 50 ways in one class of how not to treat a casualty.
Got it.
Therefore, like, I tell my son all the time, right? My kid's in E5 in the Army now. And and he's like, oh man, I'm scared to go in, and I got a buddy whose kid is in the Q course right now. And I'm like, look, man, you're going to figure out what to do. Like, you're by process of elimination, you're going to figure out what to do. I can tell you this. The best thing you can do is learn what not to do.
Yep.
Because when you look across and put yourself a bunch of other peers, if you just figure out what people are getting in trouble for and not do that, like showing up late, being a fatty, freaking running your mouth when you're not, if you just don't do that stuff, you're automatically going to be better than your peers. Right. So it's not always about maybe excelling, or it's like playing golf, right? Like, to be a scratch golfer, you don't have to make a bunch of birdies. You just have to not make doubles.
Yeah, sure.
Right? Like, if you just don't put it in the water, you'll play better. Right? You won't take as many penalty shots. You'll play better. That's the secret to anything in life, right? If you just remove the fuck ups, what's left is a pretty good product. Right? So that's pretty much been my life mantra, man. Like, I'm not going to fuck up like that guy. And in fact, the worst parts of my life were my biggest fuck ups, right? So I'm like, well, I'm not going to do that again. And that was the best part about being in our community, is that they gave you the range span to fuck up within and not make it a career ender or make it so devastating. It's like good parenting, right? Like, here's your range fan. I'm going to allow you to operate as much as you want within this. And when you start going over towards this boundary, I'm going to push you back in and say, okay, that's too far, but I can go back in. And then I'm going to let you go again and have you figure it out in there. In today's society, with all this structured and I'm allowed to do this and I can do that, there's no free form room to go, because you have zero chance, zero room for fuck ups, and zero tolerance for any kind of mistake. And that's just not a way for people to grow through experience, right? Like, that's all we are, is the sum of our fuck ups. You know what I mean?
Scott, usually we end on advice. Like I would have asked you, what's your advice? But for the last 2.5 to 3 minutes, you just absolutely freaking killed it, man. So that feels like a good place to end. Dude, thanks for coming on, man.
Can we spend 2 minutes on POVAT?
Yeah, absolutely.
After I got
absolutely.
out?
Yeah.
Just to kind of give a once over the world of why we're here and how we met and why we're doing this today. And not just because I can tell you that as badass as I consider myself in my own mind, and as my nieces and nephews look up to their cool SF uncle, there's little I've done in my career that gives me as much job satisfaction and pride as what we're doing now, if that makes sense. Just being able to help out dudes in our community for this. So, for those who don't know who I am, don't know what we're doing, I work for a foundation called Project One Bed at a Time. When I got out of the military, I thought I was supposed to do what everybody else was supposed to do, right? Like get a real job. So I went and got a job at ER, and cause that's where the big money is, right? I thought grown-ups had to work, and it was fucking miserable, right? Like working with, going from pulling sick call on a bunch of SF dudes to going to pull sick call at Walmart was absolutely eye-opening and a culture shock I was unprepared for, right? Like I was unprepared for the weakness of humanity outside of the military bubble that I had been living in, right? So I was coming home miserable. I was doing 12-hour shifts, coming home miserable every night. You know what I mean? Just the ridiculous, reasons why people go to ERs nowadays, because they don't have health insurance. And, it's the easiest way to walk in and get seen, like an urgent care clinic. And, as a PA, you're going to see all the mid-level BS, right? Like the headaches, the belly pains, the sniffles
Sure.
and whatever. And you got, grown ass 40-year-old men coming to the ER because they woke up this morning with the sniffles. You know what I mean? It's just not something thought I was going to get into, right? I thought I was going to be in emergency medicine, but you're not going to do emergency medicine in an ER. ERs are just, walk-in clinics at this point, except for the random car accident or gunshot wound or whatever.
Sure.
So, my wife actually made the suggestion that I, seek other employment, because she's like, you sacrifice 30 years of your life to be miserable every day. Like that's absolutely insane. Right. And she's a psychologist. So she's like, this is, this is not what you should be doing with your life. I'm telling you right now, professionally, this is unhealthy for your mental well-being. And out of nowhere, I got an email from the VA saying, hey, we're looking for a part-time guy to do CMP exams. And I was like, I don't know what that is, but I'll do it. I'm your guy. Right. So it was part-time, and I went through a little bit of a training period, right? I had to do a month of training for the VA, and I'm the one that does the exams for guys when they put in for VA disability. And so different categories of dudes, guys getting out of the military right? So active duty guys getting out of the military, guys who have never filed before, just never thought they were, had access to it or whatever. And then guys who have filed before, but disagree with their ratings, right? So I'm the guy that when you fill out the paperwork, they would send you for exam. I'm the guy that did the exam and do it. So I knew I knew how the paperwork went. I knew the protocols. I knew the pipeline. I know why guys get approved, why they get denied, why they get increased from a 0. What's the delineation between a 0, a 10, and a 20, and that kind of stuff. So I did that for a bunch of years until COVID hit. And then, as you know, the government completely shut down, right? Like COVID hit, they just shut us all down. They came to me and they look, man, like we don't know when we don't know how long this will go on. It could be 2 months, it could be 3 months, it could be 6 months, it could be a year, but we can't see patients anymore. Mm-hmm. So I know that you got to feed your family. You might want to go get a new job or whatever, but you can't come back to work until further notice. And I was like, well, that kind of sucks. You know what I mean? So either one of two things is going to happen. Either I'm going to be hurting for money, or I'm going to realize I didn't need this fucking job to begin with. So right. It never really put it. I was like, cool, I'm going to go play, because for some reason, Florida put golf on the essential activities list. So it never put a dent in my lifestyle, right? Nice. The only thing that changed was when you went to the golf course, they told you couldn't share a buggy. You had to have your own cart.
Okay.
So I was like, kick ass, right? So it actually sped up play a little bit because you're not driving back and forth. So my life never even changed. I just kept playing golf every day. And then Cal went through the problems that he had with his VA rating, right? And he called me up one day and he's like, hey man, like, I'm having these problems, do you have any recommendations? And I'm like, well, you got denied this because of this. This is what happened. And this is what she did on the paperwork and blah, 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 blah. It's a no-brainer. You're just going to have to file a supplemental claim and file the stuff and, go to appeal. So he called some people he knew. They got involved, lawyer. They got him re-looked at. He had the right, said the magic words, the right phrase, and he got bumped back up. And he's like, hey man, that's awesome. And then he called me, like a couple weeks later. He's like, hey, I got this guy. Can you look at his case? Look at his stuff. And I'm like, yeah, sure. So I looked at his stuff and he got bumped up. And he's like, look, man, like I got a couple dudes that we want to help dudes like in our community, like deal with this ridiculous process that's in front of us. Right. So we want to bring you on and have you be like our medical consultant for this foundation, and kind of like, we'll go out and raise money. And because right now there's a bunch of people out there. And you can go online and search these people. There's a bunch of businesses that do this for a living that charge like $5,000 to look at your case. And they have a medical guy look at the medical records. They have, a medical records reviewer. They have a guy that helps you file your claims. They have a guy that, helps go through the regulations with you. They have send you to doctors or whatever, and all that costs money out of pocket. But no dude's going to pay, not too many retired E4s have, 5-6 grand sitting around to go maybe try to get a 10% bump on their VA rating. So they just kind of blow it off. Well, what Cal said was like, he's like, we look at those guys as like a Galaxy O cars outside of Post, right? Like anybody who makes their living off of fucking Joe out of money is dead to me, right? Like,
sure.
He's like the guy that you're on the no-fly list, right? Like the off-limits establishment list, like on Post, like we would put those guys on it. Like you're making it, like you may be helping some guys and you're just maybe that way, but these guys, they charge you $5 grand up front. They take 50% of any increase that you get, whether it's lump sum or an increase in pay. It's just not, it's not worth it to most vets. So he's like, well, what we're going to do is we're going to start a foundation, and we're going to get donations, and we're going to ask rich people, and we're going to have golf tournaments, and we're going to like anything anybody else does for 501c. And we're going to take that money and we're going to pay for the medical records review. We're going to pay for anytime they need to see a doctor, whether it's a CT, MRI, or whatever. We're going to pay for that. We're going to pay to have their records uploaded and scanned. We're going to pay for you to go through other shit and walk them through the process and kind of look at their case and put it all together and zap and wrap it and go. And so Joe comes out with no money, charges them absolutely zero, costs $0 to use our organization. And we help people with their ratings. And I've been doing this for a couple of years with these guys now. We've helped hundreds of dudes. I keep track of the data of the guys that I've helped, and kind of, cause I keep a spreadsheet of everybody I've helped, and then, where they're at when we start and what they have. And as of this week, I think, I don't know if I got it on my desktop here, but I kind of keep a running tab. I'm at 130 grand a month as of now, of like a couple hundred guys I've done and the increases that they've gotten. So that comes out to like $1.5 million a year back into these dudes' pockets, and that doesn't even count the tax breaks and the educational benefits. And not only that, but the sheer weight of out of their rucksack that they don't have to deal with these motherfuckers anymore. And they don't have to worry about, having a roof over their heads or feeding their family or a car payment or whatever, because they got a couple extra $100 in their pocket or whatever. But when you can say that, and it costs money to put guys through this program, right? So it's not like we can just open up and say, hey, we'll take everybody in. It's a referral based organization. So if we do a veteran, like he finds a buddy of his or another SF dude or PJ or CCT or SEAL or, ground branch guy or whatever that needs our help, they get referred to us, and we go try to raise another, it costs anywhere between $4,700 and $9 grand to put a guy through the program, depending on what level they're at, whether they need a lawyer to appeal a decision and actually go to court with them and fight it and file the paperwork and all that stuff. If they don't need any legal representation, we could do it for less than $5 grand a piece, which is pretty cheap, but we still need less than $5 grand, right? So we try to do, the goal is to do, I think they did like 10 guys the first year, 25 guys the second year. And the goal was to do 50 this year, but we're already over 60 and it's freaking July. You know what I mean? So we might hit 100 dudes this year, but think about it, 100 dudes, like that's, at $5 grand a piece, that's $500,000, right? Like that's, at an average, and that's if you need more than that. So, and that doesn't even count, these guys running a golf tournament or something like that. You might spend 20 grand to make 50.
Right.
You know what I mean? So you got to have that money too. So there's, and then you have to pay your consultants and your whatever. We have a case manager, like the best thing about this organization is the board doesn't get any money. The CEO doesn't take a salary. The only people that get paid in the organization are the people that they consult to do the job that would do it, right? Because there's, just in what I do alone, there's four jobs, right? There's a medical records reviewer. There's a guy who files the claims. There's the guys that walk you through all the regulations on it. And you got to have the time to be able to do this as a side gig, right? So we have a case manager that kind of puts it all in. We have an administrative assistant, so we got to pay them. So you need to do 100 guys. You probably need $1 million a year to an organization, right? Yeah. And so you got to have a solicitor whose only job is dedicated out there to go do fundraising and solicit these big organizations to donate. Because you remember back in the day, they had the combined federal campaign. Mm-hmm. Remember, they would go to Joe and say, hey, donate $50 a month to the Red Cross and start an allotment. But when I came in, that was like a 2-page, pamphlet.
Right.
Now that book is this thick.
It's 45 pages.
And there's thousands and thousands and thousands of veterans organizations out there. So those are the people that we have to compete with for ducats, right? Like, mm-hmm. you have to go to a business and they're like, we're already given to, Folds of Honor or, the SEAL Foundation or the PJ Foundation, the CCT mm-hmm. Foundation or the freaking, we give a puppy to PTSD Foundation or whatever. And we have to compete with those for dollars, man. And it's not easy, right? Because what we do is boring as shit. Right? Like
right.
Think about it. The only people that think that what we do is cool is the freaking, insurance guy. Right.
Right.
The accountant in the back of the room, right? He was like, I'll give $20 to that. That's accounting shit. Right. Because we're nerdy, right? We're going through thousands of pages of medical records. We're going through your VA case files in the past to see if they had screwed everything up, right? To see if you got to, because when I worked for the VA, our own internal auditing is that 86% of vets have an incorrect VA rating. Right.
Wow.
And you're like, okay, so that's a wow moment, right? Like that's an oh shit moment, but it's not as bad as you think, right? Like that may be as simple as a guy who's never filed before, mm-hmm. right? Like he's deserving of a rating because he was, he had some stuff wrong with him when he was in, he just never filed. So that's an incorrect rating. You were given a 0 for your ankle when you obviously should have gotten a 10 for it. That's an incorrect rating. And they gathered this data by how many people that were in service that never filed, by how many people that have filed that have a rating that were put in for increases, that were denied claims, because in 35% of all claims are denied because of administrative clerical errors on the VA's part. So at least 1 out of 3 dudes that gets a VA rating is automatically got a wrong rating just because of, the wrong form was filled out, or this box wasn't checked, or, anybody that's, listening to you right now that's been in the military knows that, has tried to submit an award for a kid that gets kicked back 5 times because the font was wrong, because it wasn't, 1.2 inches on the margin instead of 1.15 inches. Like that shit happens because it's still a government run organization. Right. And I'm not trying to say that it's a bad organization, because the Department of Veteran Affairs is actually a very good organization. It's good medicine. It's good for, they have no problem paying people when a claim is approved and proven that it's correct. It's absolutely good, but it's still a bureaucratic organization, right? It still has a bunch of moving parts. And when people are like, oh man, the VA fucked me, and they talk to it like it's a guy. Like it's Jeff.
Yeah.
VA hat on.
Like it's one guy. Yeah. Jeff hates me.
And I've been in internal meetings in this organization and in other organizations where, like, I'm tired of the VA's and attitude of not helping. I'm like, dude, you're talking to it like it's a guy. It's not an attitude in the VA. It's a very bureaucratic process.
It's a massive bureaucratic government run organization.
Yeah. And what we are good at our organization is what we say all the time. We out VA the VA. We play their game better than they do, right? It's no different than being an SF guy. We find out what the rules are and we use them to our advantage, right?
Nice.
We make sure that the paperwork is absolutely spot on 100 correct by getting it in front of somebody who knows what they're looking at before we submit it. Right? Like what are the T's that need to be crossed and the I's that need to be dotted? We're going to fill it out for you, and we're going to put it in front of our subject matter expert. He's going to be like, nope, that was supposed to say X, Y, and Z. You filed it under claim 5008, and it should have been a 5006. All right, let's redo the paperwork before we submit it, and we make sure that it's right. Before people are going in, we're like, okay, what is the regulation state about your claim, right? Like, why do people get denied claims, right? It's because, like it could be something as simple as when you went through and you hurt your back, that they called the guy that wrote you up in your records for it, called it, pain in the back, lumbar pain. You know what I mean? And you can't file for anything. Left knee pain in the left knee, right? That just because there's an ICD-10 code for it in medicine doesn't mean it's a claimable thing, right? Like to the VA, pain in the left knee is a symptom.
Sure.
What's causing the pain in the left knee? Is it tendonitis? Is it an ACL tear? Is it a meniscal tear? If it's a specific line number item, they'll compensate you for it. But if it's just pain, that's a symptom and you can't get a claim for that. Yep. So there's a lot of people that are deserving of ratings that were never documented correctly in their file because they was written wrong. And it's no fault to them. It's because as providers, everything's electronic now, right? Like we're not hand jamming notes anymore. We have an electronic medical record. So everything's kind of handed to me. All I do is click buttons. So if I type in the word knee, the first one that comes up says pain in the left knee. I'm going to click that as the diagnosis.
Right.
And I just screwed the guy. Right. So it's not his fault. So but that's fixable, right? We have a fix for that and we can get guys ratings, right? The VA is very point blank. It's no different than Army regulations. Like, hey, like we have 670-1 in the Army, uniform code regulations, right? You can either wear the hat or you can't. Cut and dry, right? Like it says you can do this or you can't. The VA is the same way. There's a regulation for everything. If you see what the regulation is, you meet the regulation, you get the rating. It's that easy. It's really no.